Hey everybody, welcome to the talk. I'm so glad you're here. I want to thank the Jeffrey Wolf Green EA study group for inviting me to speak. Usually when people ask me to speak, I say yes. So if there's any groups out there, looking for a speaker, I'm really available. Usually I talk about locational astrology, but today we're talking about Ceres, which is one of the subjects so close to my heart as an astrologer, and one where I think I have I don't know, at least some unique experience with her. Not necessarily a unique perspective, but maybe a little bit. So I've wanted to give a talk specifically about Ceres for some time because I feel like she is one of the great, relatively undiscovered secrets and wonderful things in astrology. So this comes out of a place of wanting to share some really good news for the with you guys about something that this lecture rather is titled Ceres, the Other Great Benefic, which I absolutely believe. I absolutely believe that she is on the same level as Jupiter in terms of being what we might consider sort of this great benefic influence in astrology. In other words, something that tends to be very supportive, very protective, that enhances things, that amplifies things, that shows a lot of our greatest gifts in life, our greatest abundance in life. I believe she is just on par with them. I don't put her any lower than Jupiter. And we're going to explore her from a number of different angles today. The astronomy of Ceres, a little bit of mythology. I'm going to be sharing my experience with her. And the reason I'm so convinced of her, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, is I came across Ceres through my friend Kelly Lee Phipps, who is a really great astrologer. This talk is also to honor him and his life's work. He wrote a book called Celestial Renaissance. Let me go ahead and show you that. There's a big copy of it here. It's kind of a big, beautiful book. And Kelly was of the opinion, he advocates something that I now advocate as a modern rulership scheme. Now, if you practice a traditional rulership scheme, I don't actually want to necessarily change how you do that. I think it's great. I think if you're consistent and you have a method of understanding astrology that is balanced and has a sort of an elegance to it, that seems like well put together, go wild, like have fun, right? But I do think that there is room for, and this is something we'll talk about later in the lecture, room for a rulership scheme where we have 12 bodies for 12 signs. And I think that the system kind of begs that at this point, given that a lot of us connect Uranus with Aquarius and Neptune with Pisces and Pluto with Scorpio. So Kelly was of the opinion that Ceres is not only this super important influence, which he very much connected with abundance, nature, more of a wonderful supportive energy. He very much felt that she was connected with Taurus, and we'll get into that as well. So in other words, if you're someone who says Pluto is ruled by Pluto, Scorpio is ruled by Pluto or co-ruled by Mars and Pluto, I'm going to make the case that you should consider Ceres for Taurus, and you can obviously include Venus in there as well. And that's really not the main thrust of what I want to talk about today, because again, I don't think you have to do that. I think you very well might want to. I mean, I think there's a lot of richness in that. But what I think is so strange is that we've kind of ignored her, in so many ways, not just astrologers, even like our popular understanding of astronomy. She's been really surprisingly underappreciated. And a lot of folks don't know that she is really quite different than the other asteroids. She is in a league of her own, One of these things is not like the others. And Ceres is not like the others for a number of reasons. So we'll go into that, here today as well. So I'm making an argument today, right? I am attempting to persuade you guys a little bit, which I don't often do. Normally I would just say, here's what I have found is true. There you go. Play with it if you want, But I think there is with Ceres a reason to make a case for her and to argue for her inclusion in more ways than she has been included, generally speaking, to this day. So if you find that you do like this lecture, I'm going to ask you, please consider sharing it. And you'll see why I think this is so important. There's some good cheer here. We have another great benefic in our charts. I mean, how cool is that, right? How cool is it that we have something that shows so much abundance, so many gifts, such a supportive sort of energy, such a positive energy? That it's just a great thing. And I think, I want to get into Kelly a little bit, and what a wonderful guy he was, and that he really brought her forward for me and a lot of people. I think he was offering us a real gift that I don't think enough of us caught while he was alive. And he passed away in 2014. So one of the cases I'm going to try to make here today is that she is a great benefic, on par with Jupiter. I'm going to at least give you my perspective on that. That we have made a couple of massive mistakes with her. One is that we've relatively ignored her when she was a very significant discovery. When we look at the discovery of Uranus, and then Ceres, and then Neptune, and then Pluto, that's in chronological order, that I think we have made a massive mistake. We have had a massive blind spot to somehow emphasize these other bodies without emphasizing Ceres. I think that was a total mistake, just oversight. Just, I don't get it. Now I don't get it. Although I think it's interesting why, that it's happened. I'm also going to make the case that she should not be defined so much in terms of the problematic side of her. Now, I do think she is connected with things like grief and loss, or, issues around food that people might have, eating disorders, for example. That she is connected with some issues around mothers, which can be difficult. So, like any planet can have a difficult side, right? If it's sort of in the more challenging positions, right? More challenging aspects, maybe more challenging houses. Maybe it's a sign that the planet doesn't do quite as well. And there's any number of things as astrologers we look at and say, okay, this is Jupiter, but it's not like the most, well-placed Jupiter, right? We might see problems with a planet like Jupiter or Venus or any planet. So Ceres is just like the other planets. She can be in that state as well. And I also want to make the case that Kelly Lee Phipps deserves a lot of credit, and I want to talk about him a little bit too. So before I jump into anything, I just want to make sure we've got kind of control set up here. So there is a chat window, okay? So I think if people do ask questions, I think I'll be able to see that in the chat, and you guys can tell me if those are kind of piling up or not. But where do we want to start? Well, here let's look at Ceres herself a little bit. Let's look at why she's so amazing. And even just this week, as I've been preparing for this lecture, I've learned some really remarkable things about her. Now, I would imagine that one of the arguments someone might make in favor of not including a dwarf planet, and she is classified as a dwarf planet by the astronomers. Why someone might argue that she's not so important? Well, she's an asteroid. It's actually interesting that I found today that not everyone actually even considers her an asteroid. Some people consider her a dwarf planet, and then all the other things in the asteroid belt are asteroids. So that perspective is out there, even with some of the sort of astronomical, organizations, or I think it's on the wiki page. I've got that link here we can look at. So here we have this dwarf planet. So a dwarf planet is, generally speaking, have what's called hydrostatic equilibrium, and that is it's spherical. It's a sphere, and this is one of the things that differentiates Ceres from all of the other asteroids. So in order to be spherical, that body has to have enough of its own gravitational pull and force that it pulls all of the stuff into a sphere, right? And some of the other bodies in the asteroid belt are not like that. Actually, the other ones are, generally speaking, not like that. They don't look like planets. They don't look like round like our moon. They have different sort of odd shapes to them. The Ceres is actually composed of something very different. Like her nature is different than the other asteroids. So people have also, astronomers have also wondered if she was not really an original part of that asteroid belt. So one of the perspectives is that she was like this embryonic planet that didn't quite fully form into a planet, because Jupiter's gravitational pull stole too much of the stuff. there's a fascinating relationship between Ceres and Jupiter that I'm exploring even today. I'm having some realizations about that.
Moses,
So yes, please.
Excuse me for jumping in. Are you sharing your screen? Because I see it on your video, but I don't see it on the screen.
Are you guys seeing a Ceres here? I've got you guys see that the web page I'm on here? It's a NASA web page.
I see it.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Because I just see it on your video up in the corner.
No, it's showing.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for asking.
Okay, great.
So Ceres at one point in time, now there's probably a great amount of ice that was trying to sort of, be this embryonic planet and acquiring more stuff to sort of form a planet around this. And the idea is that Jupiter, again, his gravitational pull stole some of that material that she might have used to form herself into a more full-fledged planet rather than what we call a dwarf planet today. That's pretty interesting. The most fascinating thing I've learned about Ceres this week, now let me show you before I jump into this, her relative size. Now, I was starting to say that one of the arguments against her inclusion might be that she's small, she's one of the asteroids, and it's true, she is smaller than even Pluto by a bit, smaller than Mercury. So for example, Ceres versus the Earth, this is the size of Ceres, this dot right here, compared to the Earth. All right, here's the size of Ceres compared to Pluto, like this. Now to Pluto, you can see she's not as small compared to the Earth as Pluto. She's got more size going there. Here's another scale comparison here. We've got Mars up top here, Mercury below him, our moon right there, Ceres, smaller than our moon, and there's Vesta. The other asteroids, again, are so, in so many ways, and so many other, just in such a different category. They don't have the most amazing thing that Ceres has: water. Right? Like Ceres, here's what is really stunning about this. This is a relative size comparison between Mercury and Ceres, and between Neptune and Mercury. So how many dwarf planets have water? How many planets have water? Let's include the dwarf planets plus the planets. How many of them have water? Well, you might know Earth, and then the other one is Ceres. There's two. Isn't that significant? And in fact, there might even be life as we know it on Ceres, but it might be, they say maybe like small microbes, kind of like bacteria. And the thing I was saying a moment ago that is so amazing about her, and especially when you consider the relative size of the Earth and Ceres, is that Ceres likely has more water in her entire self than the Earth. Now, why is that? It's because the Earth has water, right? We have our fresh water, but the rest of the planet, like we're getting lower below the sort of layer of the Earth that we're on, and well, there we have our water, but below that it's not water. Well, Ceres is essentially made of everyone seems to think, although it's not 100% confirmed, that she's made of like ice and rocks. So she's this icy, rocky, sort of thing. So here's one of these images of Ceres that we see. So I see quite a bit. I took some pictures the other day of my screen as I was watching a number of YouTube videos about Ceres, and I recommend doing that, by the way. Go on YouTube, Google Ceres, and you will find some really fascinating videos about her. She's really a fascinating thing to just look into a little bit. So this is this water ice layer, right? And so the Earth doesn't have that depth to its water. It's much more on the surface. So I was shocked to find that that Ceres has more water as a whole than the Earth when you consider what is likely the ice within her. And there is water vapor in her atmosphere. There's some release from like these kind of icy volcanoes or something like that. Okay, so that's real different, isn't it? I mean, certainly nothing in the asteroid belt has water, and none of the other planets do either. So I think that I'm going to slowly try to make this case that she's pretty special, she's pretty different. And this is I think the most remarkable thing to consider. So she has hydrostatic equilibrium, like a sphere. She contains probably more water than the Earth, even though I think her diameter is about 1/13 that of the Earth. That's pretty interesting. And so she, in the asteroid belt, the idea is that she may have eventually just kind of gravitated over there. She had tried to form herself as a planet at one point, and just sort of ended up with all the space junk, with all the rocks, all the space rocks that are the asteroids. And no offense to the asteroids, but she's not like them. She's really not. And so part of the mistake I think we made is we never really made that distinction. We never really emphasized that I think it was right in front of us. I think it was really quite obvious, and we missed it for so many, more than a couple hundred years roughly. We didn't really say, wait a minute, one of these things is not like the other. Here's another, once we're doing the size comparisons here, there's our moon. Okay, here's Ceres, there's Pallas, there's Juno, and there's Vesta. One of the things I found interesting today, I actually didn't know, is that Juno is really not that significant compared to a number of asteroids. There are a bunch of them that are, roughly Juno-sized. I think I have a bunch of tabs here that I'm intending to get to at various points here today. Let's see. Okay, I thought I had this one up. Oh, here we go. So a list of exceptional asteroids. So look at this. Here's Ceres, being her beautiful spherical, watery, icy self. And by the way, it's one reason they think that she doesn't have such big craters in her, because she's almost certainly been hit by a number of things. But because of the icy nature in her, that essentially what I gathered is it kind of would smooth that out a little more because it's more flexible underneath the surface. So she doesn't have these giant craters like a lot of planets do. And here's Vesta, kind of potato shaped over there. There's Pallas. Now, in this case, she looks relatively spherical, but she doesn't have hydrostatic equilibrium like Ceres does. And then here's a bunch of other ones. This is Hygeia. I believe Hygeia is the next biggest one. Some astrologers connect her with health themes, and I think you can use her for that reason. And there's a size argument to be made here. And so there's a whole bunch of interesting asteroids. By the way, Herschel came up with the term asteroid, the same guy that discovered Uranus. And there's Juno. You could easily miss Juno with all the rest of these fellows here, or gals here. Kind of in a way, not doesn't really stand out all that much. And one of the interesting things I found getting ready for this talk was that for about 50 years, from roughly around the beginning of the 1800s until somewhere around the 1850s, there were a number of astronomical texts and things that, where they actually listed Ceres as a planet, full on. There was this idea of Bode's law, Titus Bode, which is one of these things that was used actually to predict where she would be and where Uranus would be. And so that Bode's law is, let's see, here's the wiki. So the formula suggests that extending outward, each planet should be approximately twice as far from the sun as the one before. This is also connected to the golden ratio, the golden number here, 1.618. This is a fascinating link. If you want to go here, it's goldennumber.net/solar-system/. And really fascinating looking into this phi relationship, which shows up in a variety of fascinating ways. And so clearly some of the math of the universe is using this. And this kind of shows the average of the mean orbital distances of each successive planet in relation to the one before it approximates phi. So Venus is about 1.8 as her relative mean distance relative to the previous being Mercury. The Earth is about 1.4, Mars 1.5, Ceres 1.8, Jupiter 1.9, Saturn 1.8, Uranus 2.0, Neptune 1.5, Pluto 1.3. So Titus Bode had this Bode's law, and he was sort of saying, well, there should be some points here that we haven't discovered yet. I remember taking an astronomy class at the University of Georgia in the 1990s, and we talked about this. So here's a pretty interesting, is a graphical plot of the 8 planets, Pluto and Ceres versus the first 10 predicted distances. And what's pretty interesting about this is that Bode's law holds up extraordinarily well through Uranus, and that's how we found Uranus, I believe, is that we were looking for something right about there, right about that far out. And so the red line here is showing the Titus Bode rule prediction for where an object should be, and then the blue line shows the actual distance, how far it is from the sun, and it works perfectly. Venus, Earth, Mars, Ceres, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus diverges a bit when we get to Neptune and Pluto, so that is a bit different there. But this is part of how we found Ceres, and why we were looking around in the asteroid belt. So she was discovered by, I love all the YouTube videos on Ceres show this guy's face, Giuseppe Piazzi, an Italian in Palermo, Sicily, January 1st, 1801. He discovers Ceres. He's looking at a bunch of things. He figures this out. He writes a letter later to, like a few weeks later, to everybody and says, hey, I found this thing. And then people start looking, and then they start discovering more of the asteroids. So it was that what we kind of think of as the 4 asteroid goddesses in our popular astrology these days, those were the first 4 discovered. If I'm not mistaken, I believe they were. And then eventually, of course, we found more and more and more. One of the estimates I saw in a video on this subject was that there are 1.9 million asteroids, roughly. And that's an estimate. It could be a lot more. So there's a whole lot of stuff out there in the asteroid belt. And this is one of the reasons, by the way, that Ceres was not given status as a planet, and why she got kind of demoted to dwarf planet when they were considering should she be a planet. And this was not that long ago. And the idea was that the body needed to have cleared out the space around it. It needed to have, pulled everything in its own sort of area into itself. And so Ceres, hanging out with all the asteroids, she did not meet that criteria. So, okay, well, then she's a dwarf planet. Now, one more thing on the kind of the whole size argument here, because again, people might say, well, she's too small. I'm gonna ask you to guess in your mind, how many Mercuries could you fit in Jupiter? If you take the volume of Mercury and the volume of Jupiter, just you don't have to tell anyone, just guess in your mind. How many Mercuries do you think could fit inside of Jupiter? I'll give you a moment to consider that. In fact, if you want to put it in the chat, you can. And if you're the one who gets closest to it, maybe you'll win a prize. I don't know. So, and while you're considering that, and feel free to put it in the chat, and feel free to be quite wrong on this, because I'm sure I would have been. Awesome. We got some folks here in the chat. Yes, so they were discovered, right? So here's a comment here from Amy. One of the possible reasons why the first 4 asteroids were considered planets for a while, they were all discovered between 1801, 1807. The 5th Astraea was not found until 1845. I thought it was later than that on Astraea. One of the videos I saw said it was 1850 something, but we could be wrong here. Who knows? So yeah, so we were looking for a planet. Like they were Bode's law. They were saying there should be another planet here, right? And Ceres was found, and so they said, there we go. Planet, our work is done. And then they started finding a lot of other things, and then the astronomers got a little confused. And then around the time Astraea was discovered, which one of the sites I saw, I think I wrote down the date here. Oh, you are indeed correct. Sorry, it is December 8th, 1845. Astraea was discovered. She is less than half the size of Juno. So that sort of sunk, Ceres battleship, because then all of a sudden they're like, well, we got to consider these something else. And then they changed the convention. Then they numbered them, and they put a number in front of the name. And so they started to consider them differently. But I do think it's interesting that for quite a while, human beings thought Ceres was a planet. But then again, so did they for Juno and Vesta and Pallas too. But again, Ceres, I'm going to make the case here, is quite different than even them. So we got all kinds of great guesses here: 500, 180, 8 million, 100, 9,000, 3,000, 20,000. I think Eve Wilson is going to win the prize today as being the closest anyway. How many Mercuries fit inside of Jupiter? 24,462. Holy cow, right? That's a big number. So given that astrologers don't consider Jupiter 25,000 times more significant than Mercury in a chart, I mean, we consider all the planets relatively equally. I think this kind of, does size matter in this case? No, because, look at this, 25,000, right? So in terms of astrology, I mean, the moon, right? I mean, I guess she's bigger than some things, but including Ceres, but size is not necessarily the determinant of whether or not we consider something astrologically significant, because everybody agrees Mercury is significant, right? Even though Jupiter should be 25,000 times more significant if size sort of mattered in this case, right? So that's pretty interesting, puts things into perspective, right? So yeah. So back to having fun with discovering what Ceres is all about. So yeah, here's I mentioned, if anything does live on Ceres, likely to be very small microbes similar to bacteria. If Ceres does not have living things today, there may be signs that it harbored life in the past. That's interesting. So there's even ideas that, like, in terms of space exploration, they might be able to, like, sort of have a base on Ceres to mine the ice for water. So she could be pretty important to us at some point as we escape our burning death trap that we've created through our fossil fuels. Anything else interesting here? I think that was the main thing I want to show on this page. Ceres is so much bigger and so different from its rocky neighbors that scientists classified it as a dwarf planet. Now, this is the lowest number I have seen. He said this NASA site says Ceres comprises 25% of the asteroid belt's total mass. 1/3 is the number I've usually come across. So she's roughly 1/3 of the asteroid belt's estimated total mass. 40% is the highest estimate that I have seen. All right. So in terms of mass, Pluto is still 14 times more massive. This is pretty cool. Here's Ceres. Play around on here. One of the things that they're trying to figure out is that, look at this, right? There's this, like, what is this? Is this ice? And so this is one of the interesting features when in 2015, here's what's interesting about 2015. 2015 was the year when our spacecraft visited both Ceres and Pluto. Another thing that I think kind of in a as above, so below kind of way suggests that they're similar, that they're on par with each other in some respect. As I think these ought to be considered as very powerful astrological bodies. And I'm trying to remember if they thought it might be ice, but I think they decided it's probably more like some kind of a salty deposit there. This little space that she's got there. So there's even maybe a little salt. I think it's different than the salt we know, but it's almost like salt and water. It kind of sounds almost like the Earth. By the way, she's tilted just 4 degrees. So she doesn't have seasons like the other planets do. She's not like, the Earth has that tilt, right? And that's why we have our seasons. Like when we're sort of leaning into the sun, that's going to be, summer. When we're leaning away, that's winter. But she's just pretty upright. So she doesn't really have seasons quite like that. Takes her 4.6 Earth years to get around the sun. She rotates once every 9 hours. So she has one of the shortest lengths of a day in the solar system. She does not have any moons. Now, even Charon, Charon, which is Pluto's satellite, is bigger than Ceres, but she doesn't have moons, doesn't have rings. So here, scientists describe her as an embryonic planet, which means it started to form, but didn't quite finish. Jupiter's gravity prevented it from being a fully formed planet. I guess we already said that. About 4 billion years ago, Ceres settled into its current location among the leftover pieces of planetary formation in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Ceres is more similar to the terrestrial planets like Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars than its asteroid neighbors, but it is much less dense. One of the similarities is a layered interior. The Ceres's layers aren't as clearly defined. She probably has a solid core and a mantle made of water ice. In fact, she could be composed of as much as 25% water. And if that's correct, she has more water than the Earth does. So we did talk about that a little bit. Large salt deposits, but the salt in Ceres isn't like table salt, which is sodium chloride. It's made of different minerals like magnesium sulfate. Okay. So anyway, it's really fun to learn about her. They don't think she has a magnetosphere. Okay, we looked at this, the size comparison. It only lets me compare Earth and Pluto. We can also get Eris in here. She is, actually it doesn't do that same visual on Eris. So Eris, Haumea, Makemake, I think is how that's pronounced. They are also classified as dwarf planets. But I'm still going to argue here that Ceres is different even than them, in a number of ways. And I think what, my take on the rulership thing, which I think I want to get to later here, is there's a number of key things that we discovered, right? So let's go here. Uranus discovered March 13th, 1781. So this shattered, the order of things as we know it. Let me look at, I'm going to look at, I took scans of Kelly Lee Phipps's book. He has, about 4 pages or so dedicated strictly to Ceres. And I want to look at this argument because I think it's kind of neat the way he sees it, and I agree very much with him on I think what we're going to be looking at here. So he says, I'm reading from page 50 of Celestial Renaissance. In astrology, the ancients had a wonderful balance. The sun and moon reflected the zodiac styles of Cancer and Leo, while Mercury governed the next 2 signs around the zodiac, Venus then the next, da 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 da. So with the discovery of Uranus, or Prometheus, he puts in parentheses, which is an alternate name some of us might use for Uranus. In 1781, the old sacred geometry was shattered. The planet reflecting the archetype of Aquarius, which obviously he connects with Aquarius, signaling the start of the 300-year interface between the age of Pisces and the age of Aquarius, signaling what had been unmasked. Then Neptune came out of hiding in the next century, 1846, to claim Pisces. Now, even he skips over Ceres, maybe inadvertently right here, because 1801, the next big major discovery, a thing that we considered a planet, was Ceres, 1801. Pluto exploded on the scene just in time for World War II and atomic bombs to claim transformational Scorpio. Pluto was, is it 1930? 1930, okay, 1930. A shattered planet was found in the early 1800s, and astrologers were baffled for a century or two. Now, that's one of the theories was there a planet there? Did it shatter into a bunch of different pieces? And one of the videos I saw said that that's generally not considered scientifically accurate or possible. So I think that's a theory that may have been debunked already. But a number of people wondered, was there a planet there? Did it sort of break apart? One of the channeled sources I used to read said there was, but apparently the scientists don't think so. So yeah, the scientists couldn't decide what to do with the asteroids. Chiron made its healing journey into human awareness in 1977, right before Star Wars lit the Neptune and Sag generation on fire with celestial enthusiasm about the force in interstellar exploration. So I found a sentence very interesting. He says, after a decade of research and debate, Chiron claimed Virgo, leaving Mercury to Gemini. Now, I actually, one of the things, I met Kelly, it was 2001. I was living in Hawaii, and I had my one and only major article published in the Mountain Astrologer to date, which was on the spiritual dimension of Taurus. And he really vibed with what I was saying. He connected Ceres with Taurus. So we talked and we started this great friendship. So by that point, he and I had both come to the same conclusion. And I know some of you won't go with us on that, but that Chiron is the modern ruler of Virgo. Like, he and I both had come to that. And he wrote it in such a way that he felt like it had been decided. So apparently a lot of other people had thought this too. Apparently that's been around for a while, because the way he spoke about it is kind of like that. So so what remained to govern Taurus? Now I think I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but I think he's right. I think that there isn't a really logical reason to have Mercury and Venus ruling 2 signs and everything else ruling 1. Like, this is a work in progress here. Like, it's not very satisfactory to the part of us that likes balance and symmetry and like sacred numbers. Even like, astrology is very 12 based. I feel that it's much more satisfactory to me that if we're gonna connect some of these outer planets with signs, that there ought to be 12 and not 10. We're including the sun and moon there too. So I think if you just kind of look at it like that, there's 12 holes and we got 10 pegs in the holes, and there's a couple holes that we haven't really collectively filled in yet. Now, again, I don't think you have to do a modern rulership scheme. I think you can do just great just using the traditional planets. I practice Vedic astrology. When I practice it traditionally. I don't use these other bodies really in Vedic astrology. I just kind of stick with how they do things traditionally. So I'm all for that if you like that. But the benefit of having potentially more pieces is it's like having more colors on your palette to work with. Like, imagine we had 3 planets, 3 signs, and 3 houses. How many permutations can you really get out of that, right? There's only so much you could really do with that if 3 was the number we were working with. Get up to 7 planets, 12 signs, 12 houses. Okay, we get a lot more permutations of things. What about 12, 12, and 12? So potentially we have a much richer ability to tell stories and see pictures and differentiate things, because we have more bodies to look at. Those of us who do use, for example, the outer planets, imagine not using them. Some of you, it's a terrifying thought probably, but think of how much they add, right? Just one of those bodies it adds a new, oh, well, now it's a square to this, and now it's, made this ingress into the sign. It's so powerful, right, to be able to use these things. So if we have more pieces in the puzzle, then we can do more. It's a more complex and interesting puzzle. And I believe astrology, we develop a language, a set of symbols that are mixed and matched and, combined in different categories and ways. And they essentially allow us to tell more and more complex, sort of stories. He has a quote here, see if I can find it. Not that one. I think it might be this one. So I'm going to read his last paragraph here. The point is that it matters how many bones you decide to throw in your casting. This is what we're talking about. If you use 100 bones, the system is too complex. If you put 1.9 million asteroids in your charts, I think you will have a hard time reading your chart. That's just my guess. Too few bones in the system is too simple to describe with accuracy the endless array of possibilities in life. Like I was saying, if you had 3 planets and 3 houses and 3 signs. Even if you use a number of bones less than too many and greater than too few, you still need a number that reflects the sacred geometry of the universe, he argues, if you want a clear lens without interference patterns. If you want to reflect spiritual energy patterns through to physical dimensions like Earth, it's important to use the right balanced mirror. And I think that's something we all kind of try to figure out. We all try to come to, how many things do I want to put in my chart? And so you add too much, you start to lose focus and clarity. You have too few, maybe it's too simplistic. Maybe you don't have enough pieces to tell all the complex things you want to tell. Maybe we don't see, maybe we can't see as well. So I think there's certainly an argument for this. When I draw my charts, right, I have, of course, the sun and moon, the 7 traditional planets, the 3 outer planets that we talk about, Ceres, Chiron, and the North Node and the South Node. And that's my baseline. And in holistic astrology, which is my thing, I guess, that I'm gently promoting, that is the baseline. And I believe that using that as your baseline, you could add other things to that. There are other dwarf planets. I'm not saying that they don't mean anything. But I believe you can form a very good, solid foundation to your astrology by using these particular things. And the connections with the signs I find quite compelling, including Chiron to Virgo, which is not what we're talking about today. That could be another talk. But also Ceres to Taurus. And I keep kind of leaning in that direction, even though I mean to get to that a bit later. So I think we'll come back to that again. So Kelly was trying to figure out, like, he looked at all of this and he was sort of saying, wait a minute, there's something that should be governing Taurus here, because he'd already decided Chiron was connected profoundly to Virgo. And so for a while, he says, let's see, after 12 years research, I discovered the key. Part of the solution lies in keeping 13 planets, quote unquote, planets in the system, the 12 archetypal reflectors with Earth at the center. I started using the asteroids and got tremendous interpretive results, especially when I gave Ceres to Taurus. Taurus symbolizes Mother Nature and the process of nurturing through providing the basic necessities of life, food, shelter, goods, etc. So it needed a mythological reflector that held such things sacred. Ceres, or Demeter, which means Earth Mother, fit perfectly. The grain goddess adds the last key to Aquarian Age astrology, he calls it here. Not to say that Athene, Juno, and Vesta don't work in the chart. The information that they yield is secondary, though, when compared to the rest of the chart. I wouldn't be surprised when researchers find a 4.6-year cycle, Ceres orbital period to financial investments and economic trends. So I am with him on this. And I think, again, we're making the case that Ceres is quite different. And part of the reason, and the way I put this lecture is Ceres is the other great benefic. And that's why she's different. Like, yes, she has certain meanings we could assign to her, right? My friend Eric Myers, who's an astrologer, he believes, for him, he looks at Ceres as having to do with like attachment issues, like, did you form a good attachment early in life, and so on. I have an article here from Saul. I don't want to mispronounce her last name. I apologize, Saul. Here's an article from her, and this is Solzhenitsyn. Sorry, Saul, if I'm not getting that right. Where she really has this article here, and you can look it up, on Ceres and eating disorders. Okay, so again, there are narrower ways to look at her also. But I think that's the problem, is we missed the forest for the trees. We're looking at Ceres like she's one of these other asteroids, and she's not. And so we're trying to say, well, she's specifically about this kind of thing and more in a detailed way about this kind of thing. Take a step back for a minute, right? She's way bigger than everything else. She's spherical and has hydrostatic equilibrium. She probably came from somewhere else and then gravitated into the asteroid belt. At least that's a theory. She's got more water than the Earth, quite possibly. The things I've seen seem to indicate that she probably does. She was the first one to be discovered. And I think that first to be discovered is somehow relevant and significant, just like Chiron was the first centaur to be discovered. The centaurs, I think, are between, what is it, Kuiper belt, I think? Is it Saturn to Uranus, something like that? So Chiron is also, I think, special in this respect, that he was the first discovered. He was the first to enter our consciousness as that type of body. And I think he is kind of, in a sense, the leader of that pack for that reason. There's a quote I had highlighted in here. A friend of ours, astrologer Lynn Hayes, writes, "As I work with Ceres more in personal readings, it is becoming more clear to me that Ceres acts as the higher octave of the moon." And so that's an interesting perspective. I do find that Ceres is very much like the moon in a whole lot of ways. I think this is a perfectly reasonable thing to say. People look at maybe Uranus as a higher octave of Mercury, and Pluto for Mars, and Neptune for Venus, is it? I think Venus, right? So, and Ceres with the moon. Yeah, I'm definitely down with that. So let's see if we've missed anything here. I really want to say this is another representation of the sizes here. Here we're going to get obviously the Earth. We're going to get Venus. There's Mars. There's Mercury. There's Pluto. There's Ceres. And there it says Xena. I think Xena is Eris, right? I think that was the same. That's like she had multiple names in the beginning and things like that. So one of my arguments for why Ceres is so important, why she was the first discovered in 1801, why she did also upset the order of things, and finally we found something in that area of, between Mars and Jupiter, where Bode's law said there should be a planet. One of the things when I step back and I look at what we did as astrologers, we added, many of us, modern type astrologers, we added Uranus to the pantheon. We added Neptune to the pantheon. We added Pluto to the pantheon. Now, what do you notice that they have in common? Well, they're all men, right? They're all men, and they all have their own intensity as men. And so we took a system that was balanced, right? The classical system, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, right? Sun, Moon, Mercury. And we said, hey, let's add 3 intense men to this thing. That'll keep it balanced, right? That'll have this like feeling of rightness and like, yeah, that makes sense. They make sense because they make sense. Like they're real things. But do you see how that really skewed our astrology in a certain direction? Pluto has a lot of times this very intense influence, right? Neptune, much of the time, is a very intense influence on our lives. Uranus, I think, is much more benefic than people tend to give him credit for. A lot of his results are quite wonderfully positive. That's not maybe as true if you're like in your 80s and you have a transit from Uranus and you might have a sudden health issue or something like that. But earlier in life, I remember doing a lot of sports research at one point and finding that when people were winning the big game, Uranus was very often in a hard square to something in their chart, and it was really, really noticeable. And so I developed a much more positive of Uranus over the years, because of that. I think it's very underrated as being a more a success-giving influence, something that makes us more cool and popular and makes something exciting and attractive to others and brilliant and all these things. So I think Uranus is a little bit misunderstood, perhaps, but a lot of modern astrologers still consider Uranus these sudden unexpected changes, and so it's often could be a scary potential. So this is not balanced. This is not balanced. We've added a lot more masculinity to the picture, and we have not added something feminine. And we've added things that, have overall, I'm going to say those 3 outer planets lean toward a more quote unquote malefic type influence, more challenging type influence, without adding something benefic. Even though she was right in front of us, we found her in 1801, right where Bode's law said there should be a planet, and she was considered a planet by the humans at the time. So I feel that, I feel that she does give balance to the system. I do locational astrology. That's kind of my jam, my gig. I do a lot of that. And, the more you understand locational astrology, the harder it is to find really ideal places for people. Because the more you understand it, the more you see all of the reflections of what's likely to happen to a person in a place. And if we just look at difficult things, you just end up seeing difficult things. You know what I mean? So we need something more benefic in this system. And the reason I'm giving this lecture today is because Kelly introduced me to this idea, and I said, oh, that's interesting. That's cute. Okay. I thought, yeah, whatever, you know. I didn't really take it as seriously at first, but I respected him after getting to know him, and I thought, okay, well, let's test his theory. And locational astrology is one of the absolute best ways to test astrological theories. You can relocate charts, right, and study charts for the same person in different places. I've worked with twins where one twin lives in one place, the other twin lives in the other place. They're born like, you know, very small distance apart, and we look at the differences in their lives, right? So locational astrology is such a practical tool for really testing your theories and really finding out how something really works. And take a sip of water. So I've seen approximately 20,000 locations where people have actually lived. I do a lot of this. And when someone works with me, they typically send me a history of where they have lived, and they give me some notes on what it was like in each place. And then I look at the notes, and I look at the things I look at in locational, and I see if it makes sense. And if it doesn't, I usually ask some questions about it, because I'm like, I thought it would be more like this. And then often they might say, oh, well, actually, now that you mention it, it was kind of like that. Or maybe I missed something. And then I try to figure, what did I miss here? You know? So I've done that 20,000 times roughly. And that's my typical practice. I look at someone's autobiography, essentially. I make sure everything makes sense so that I feel like I can predict something for the future for them too. So this is what I've done with Ceres. And partly out of respect to Kelly and his sort of theory about her being this great abundance energy. Not so much about the grief and loss and the eating disorders and the attachment issues and whatever. Like, okay, is she just abundance? Is she just awesome? Is she incredible like that? You know, I decided to test that. And he was right. He was absolutely right. The best way to test something in terms of its pure nature in locational astrology are through the parens or crossings. So this is where two planets will cross one another on the map. In terms of their astrocartography position, their in mundo position, one might be literally rising, one might be literally culminating or anti-culminating, things like that. And they'll cross at a certain latitude. And then we have a paren formed at that latitude. So parens, I have found, rely very little on the natal chart for their interpretation, which is unlike everything else in locational astrology. So in other words, I can look at a paren of the sun in Ceres for, you know, hundreds of people or whatever, and it seems to have its own quality as a pure, almost like a conjunction, like just a pure combination, a pairing of two things. It does not depend on the natal chart like everything else does. Like local space lines, you must consider the natal chart. You know, the astrocartography lines, you must consider the natal chart. You know, that's one of the reasons why our collective common understanding of locational astrology these days is very rudimentary, because you have people asking questions. Go in the Facebook groups for this. They'll ask questions like, you know, is a sun line good? Should I, you know, do super generic questions that you cannot answer because it's the wrong question. You know, like your Jupiter is different than somebody else's Jupiter, and it's different, right? But the parens, again, they're a much more pure expression of those two things together. And that has allowed me to see that Jupiter behaves like a massive, great benefic. In fact, the places where people tend to be happiest, like someone will say, oh, I went to this random place on a trip one time, and it was the most magical thing ever, right? The random places that people just love to death. If I had to make one guess of what you're likely to find in that place with some kind of locational astrology influence, whether it's a paren, a local space, the astrocartography lines, whether it shows up in the chart in a certain way that I can't go into in this lecture, but I have a way of quantifying what is actually relevant in the chart and what isn't so relevant. That could be the thing. There's also geodetics. You can use geodetics too. The thing if I had to guess, you know, if my life depended on it, and I said, okay, you went to Timbuktu and it was amazing, my guess is that their Ceres is going to show up there. So, and I just want to say for a moment, like I take locational astrology super seriously, because people sometimes, you know, follow my advice to go check out a place. Maybe they go live in a place. That's a huge, massive, enormous responsibility. So I'm very practical like that. I think my work is pretty grounded like that. So if I'm going to recommend a thing, it's not because, oh, my friend had a theory and I think he might be right. It's because I need to have seen it like a lot. And so that is where I'm at with Ceres. That's why I'm so passionate about this subject and why I think it's such a wonderful thing we can share with the astrological community. Because she behaves like, I often describe her as sort of this female Jupiter, you know? Now, Ceres and Jupiter were brother and sister in mythology. I think this is so interesting, right? And so Jupiter, the big brother, he literally takes the material Ceres is trying to use to form a planet, you know? And he's like, I'm the king of the gods, right? One of the things that is so fascinating about their mythology, let me see if I can find the reference to this here, is, you know, well, the famous, by far the most famous thing in about Ceres and her mythology, oh, that's different as well, is that she, the sort of the rape of Persephone story, her daughter. So, you know, the story goes something like, actually, I think I can find a good representation of it here. Okay, that's one of the things that's kind of like what I'm looking for. Where is it here? So we're going to look at the myth of Ceres, at least this part of it. We're starting to get into what her nature actually is. And I do believe that based on all this experience with locational astrology, that I have seen more purely who she is. And I think that we have tended to define her too much in terms of the story with Persephone. So I would say that's kind of like defining a woman by the fact that she got divorced and has her kid only half the time or 2/3 of the year. Because Pluto would take Persephone for approximately 4 to 6 months out of the year, apparently, in the mythology. Let's see. Okay, that's not quite what I'm looking for either. Let's see if it's over here. So now it wasn't long until Ceres realized that her daughter was missing. So she's basically going out frolicking in the field. You know, Ceres is just enjoying being out there with all the agriculture and flowers. She realizes her daughter is missing, and she searches every corner of the earth looking for her. Now, again, I'm going to argue that we've defined her too much according to this, because her nature isn't just this, right? She is the Earth Mother herself. She is the one who feeds all of us. She is the perfect grandmother. She is so benefic. She is so kind. She is so supportive. She is so wonderful. That's why I'm so excited to talk about her, because we don't pay enough attention to her, which of course reflects the way that we don't honor the earth and we don't honor women and we don't, you know, take good care of, you know, our crops, and we, you know, are kind of stupid with the way that we, you know, let our soil go. We you know, kind of rape the soil essentially, right? So that our food has less and less nutrition over time. As the goddess of agriculture and fertility got angrier, famine started to spread. This made Jupiter, the supreme Roman god, very nervous. He was afraid that all the people of Earth would die, which was a problem because then there would be no one left to worship him. Jupiter tends to have simple motives for his actions. So he sent his messenger Mercury to talk to Pluto, who was Jupiter's brother. Pluto agreed to let Proserpina go. That's another name for the daughter. According to some stories, he forces Proserpina to eat 6 pomegranate seeds, and according to other versions, she does this herself. Either way, pomegranates were the fruit of the dead, and those who ate them could not stay in the world of the living. This meant that every year, Proserpina had to return to the underworld and spend 4 to 6 months with Pluto. We're going to talk about, I'll go ahead and mention this and make sure I get back to this. Well, I think I will, but I do believe, and this is through my experience with locational astrology, looking at so many places where people have lived, that I do find that Ceres seems to be the ruler of Taurus if you use a modern scheme. And I have also found that she seems to be exalted. Now, whether you use exaltation and fall, I think it's very poorly understood these days. I don't know if it's ever been terribly well understood. I'd love to go a whole talk on that sometime too. But I do believe exaltation and fall are very useful, very powerful, very essential. And the modern astrologers have tended to just throw that baby out with the bathwater. Like I was talking to my friend Eric, right, Eric Myers, who we were talking about Ceres, and I'm sort of making an argument for, you know, looking at fall and exaltation. And he says, well, I've come across all these negative opinions about, you know, planets in their fall. And that's true. Like the popular idea is like, oh, you know, you have Venus in Virgo, you have a bad Venus, right? And so a lot of traditional astrologers are kind of like not thinking very like expansively about it. And they have just oh, it's bad kind of idea about it. And so he throws that baby out with the bathwater, like basically, which is what modern astrology has done. And it's a massive mistake, in my opinion. I'm quite clear on this. that was a mistake because we didn't take the time to understand how it actually works, what it actually means. So I believe it's a very useful concept. So Ceres seems to be exalted in the sign Cancer, which means she finds her fall in the sign Capricorn. The same as Jupiter. Jupiter's exalted in Cancer, finds his fall in Capricorn. Now, one of the reasons, there are many reasons this makes a whole lot of sense. I mean, Cancer's in the middle of the summer. Ceres is hanging out with her daughter, right? Everything's coming to life. Flowers, there's food, there's joy, everybody's getting outside. And in the winter, she's depressed. That's why everything's dying. That's why, you know, people don't have enough food in the middle of winter, because she's depressed. She doesn't have her daughter, right? So she doesn't like that time of year for sure. But that's not why I believe she's exalted in Cancer and her fall in Capricorn. It's just that it fits. It just fits very, very nicely. The reason I believe that is because I've seen it in charts. I've seen that when Ceres is in Cancer, she acts like an exalted planet acts, and can't go into all that today. And when she's in Capricorn, she acts like a fallen planet acts. Now, there's more I need to say about that, because someone might come away from this talk and decide, I'm going to look at Ceres. Maybe I'll look at her lines on my, my map for locational astrology. And I don't want you to come away with this idea that all Ceres lines are great, because anything can be challenging, right? But I will say, if you find Ceres in Taurus or Cancer, and I believe that's true in sidereal astrology as well as tropical astrology, because in my approach, I use both. But she's direct. If she's direct, not retrograde, you have a pretty straightforward extra benefic type of Ceres influence. It's essentially a good place for her to be. Let me show you something interesting about that. Now, I was starting to get into Jupiter, Ceres and Jupiter's relationships. We're going to come back to that too. But here's my friend Kelly Lee Phipps. He was born February 5th, 71, 3:14 a.m. in Jackson, Mississippi. I'm using a porphyry house system here, as he did, as I do. It's one of the house systems that I use. And what's quite significant here with this Ceres is, where is she? She's about 2 degrees of Taurus. Does anybody know the exaltation degree of the moon? It's 3 degrees of Taurus. So one of the principles, going back to some ancient astrology, is that 3 Taurus is right around this part of the zodiac that gets really lunar in a really exaggerated way, and often in a really nice way. Though it can be, exaltation can always be an extreme as well. So people who have the moon in Taurus, they're pretty grounded, solid, stable. But when they get emotional, there's a lot of emotion because it's exalted, and exaltation is like the gas pedal, not the brake pedal. So how interesting here that Kelly writes a book, 5th house, creativity, writes a book, Celestial Renaissance, and he really makes this argument that Ceres belongs in the pantheon with everybody else. And I think he's an interesting example of this one. Ceres and Taurus people, you'll find them like very, very sensual. You talk about how they're into their senses, and they'll always be like, yeah, like I'm so sensual. I smell things and I love the taste of things, and like it's a very sensual kind of placement. She's very earthy, and Taurus is all about that kind of business. Also interesting with Kelly is he did have one child. He has a son, Arion Brazenwood. Was his name, named after the protagonist of his fantasy series, fantasy novel. He wrote the first one. He intended to write 12, but he did write one. And Arion, I checked in with him today to remember what all he has been up to. He has a massive stellium in Capricorn, very earthy guy. And he was up in Montana recently working on river ecology, and now he's teaching in Colorado, in Fort Collins, on something else like that, like fire, something like fire ecology or something along those lines. I've got a screenshot of it here on my phone. Let me see if I can find it. I think I do. Anyway, he's teaching fire ecology right now. He used to be a river restoration ecologist. Before that, he had this job where he would I forget what the name of this, but there's these things that have been put in the earth in various positions. And he would go around, try to find and locate them and see if they need to be relocated and things like that. So incredibly earthy kid, wonderful guy, wonderful human. And interesting that, he had such a incredible, wonderful, earthy kid with Ceres here in this position. So we're starting to say about Ceres and Jupiter then. Now, one of the parts of the mythology, and I thought I had it in here, but maybe I don't. Part of what happens in the mythology is, I guess it wasn't here, wasn't it? So we did at least have Jupiter mentioned here. Well, the part that I think was above this, that I don't think this shows, is that what happened was Hades basically said, hey, I want to take Ceres' daughter. Like, I just want to take her. I just want to take her down to the underworld and make her my goddess, my creepy goddess down there. And Jupiter, being the kind of guy he is, he's like, yeah, sounds good to me. This is, by the way, is what is not so good about Jupiter, is he's very often, when he's dark, he's about male entitlement. He's about, I get to screw everything. I get to, go take the daughter. That's fine. I think it's interesting that there's almost a bit of a rivalry that I sense as I read the mythology between them, which I think is fascinating, because I think they are the two great benefics in our system. And one of the issues that Ceres obviously had with Jupiter was he okays that Hades just takes her daughter. Now I think it's so fascinating that Jupiter is so big; he can contain almost 25,000 Mercuries, right? And so he's the king of the gods. So who doesn't want to be the king, right? I mean, that's why all the fantasy, medieval stuff is so popular. It's like there's something in that. And so there's a great quote here I want to get to too. So Jupiter is big like that, right? And you can't miss that he's this sort of great benefic, for better or worse. Often he's for the better. Often he helps things out. But Ceres, meanwhile, is small, right? And she took the leftovers from Jupiter to make herself, and she decided to go hang out with a bunch of people that need to be fed, I guess. Right? The asteroids here are kind of like the people that Ceres is hanging out with, all of them. She's not like just by herself having all these satellites going around him that are beautiful and interesting like Jupiter is, right? She goes very humbly and hangs out in the asteroid belt with, all the other rocks out there, and she's not a rock. I think it's interesting, right? That she's small, and yet isn't that often the power of the feminine in many cases, right? There's a certain humility there, like the mother who nurtures us, into life. It's not this great big Jupiterian look at me kind of thing, it's this humble thing. So I found this interesting, what the study.com article said about her. She was a timid, modest, and sympathetic goddess, making her popular among the ancient Greek people. She was known for taking great interest in the mortals, aiding them when she could. Now that sentence, I get a little bit of goosebumpy when I look at that sentence, because that's like what she's like in locational astrology. This is what I've discovered her actual nature to be. And I've often called her, taking great interest in the mortals. I've often called her this perfect grandma. She wants to feed you. She wants you to be happy. She wants to support you. That perfect grandma, like, she's older, like she's not here for her ego so much anymore, right? She's got love in her heart. She wants her children to be happy and well fed, and to know some of that love and support. That is who she is. That is who she is. She's not the mother who's grieving her divorce or the loss of her daughter, or any of that. That is what she does when she's having a bad day. That is when she's not so well placed, when she's having a difficult placement. Yes, there's definitely grief and loss elements to Ceres, but that is not her nature. We have made the mistake of defining her by that too much. Her actual nature is she's the goddess who feeds everybody. I mean, food's kind of important, isn't it? Right? So Ray Grassi, who I'm glad to see here, and glad you're doing all right today, sir. We had a conversation recently on Facebook, and let's see here. Okay, so here's a friend here who was telling me a story about her Ceres. I was asking her about that, so we might get back to that too. But me and Ray had this conversation on Facebook a little while ago. And Ray's mentioning that one of the compelling ways to make a case for the significance and symbolic character of a body is through a series of dramatic, mundane examples. So he says, for example, if I wanted to convey the nature of Uranus, I could draw up a list of dramatic historical examples that illustrate like what happened around 1781, and what happened around that planet's return to the discovery point 84 years later, which has happened during major aspects of other bodies to it, like Jupiter-Uranus conjunction and Neil Armstrong stepping on the moon. Remember, Uranus is the sky god. The stuff that happens up there in the heavens is also very Uranian. So he's asking me, have you done anything like that with Ceres, right? What's going on in 1801? Now, I have looked at this. I was teaching a practicum class this year in locational astrology, and I looked at some of what was going on around that time. So there's a number of things that were very interesting. There's going to be one that is specific to 1801, but essentially what was going on at that period in history is there's a lot of technology as a part of our agricultural revolution that allowed people to be fed. For example, canning was invented in 1809. Imagine how important canning was at one point in time, right? Having food you could put in a can and eat in the winter, or store. Probably the kind of thing we just don't appreciate, probably take for granted, right? Now there's a lot of abundance to Ceres, and there's a lot of earthiness to Ceres. So there's a lot of key developments in the cotton gin, the patenting of the cotton gin, the 1790s and the early 1800s. And the 1801 piece that I found so interesting, there's a thing in English history, in England. Now in 1801, England was England the dominant, power in the world? I mean, they had their empire everywhere. They probably were. And so certainly they were quite a significant country. So I'm not surprised to see England, showing up with a key event here. So what happened in 1801 in England was there was this thing, and if you're curious, you can certainly look this up, was the General Enclosure Act of 1801, an early piece of English legislation or legislature sanctioning the practice of enclosure. So essentially what this does, it changes some of the laws here, and it allows for a lot more food to be produced, a lot more food to be grown. That is the short version of it. Let's see. So 5.5 million, domestic production gave way to food imports, population tripled. So that was it's a very significant thing in terms of the history of, agriculture, particularly in England, but this was starting to happen then, of course, around other countries as well. There's this massive increase in the amount of food we can produce to feed this rapidly growing population. I think it's interesting that a lot of then what I realized then is that, a lot of the abundance of things as we know it, like imagine how many things you can get access to these days, right? Just go on Amazon, you can get just about anything, right? So compared to the way life was in maybe the 1700s, think about how much is available to us. And I think a lot of these agricultural, inventions, and even some of the wealth we started to create, and then going into more and more industrial, it allowed us to have a lot of stuff and to feed more and more people, and to make more and more people because we could feed more and more people. This article mentions Jethro Tull. That's not the band. It's a different guy. But anyway, so enclosure is the process that ended traditional rights on common land formerly held in the open field system and restricted the use of land to the owner. Enclosure is one of the causes of the agricultural revolution and a key factor behind the labor migration from rural areas to gradually industrializing cities. So this also allows more people to go to the cities and go buy more stuff. Common land is owned collectively by a number of people. A person who has a right in over common land jointly with others is a commoner. In medieval England, the common was an integral part of the manor and part of the estate held by the lord of the manor under a feudal grant from the crown or a superior, who in turn held his land from the crown, which owned all land. This system granted rights of land use to different classes. A commoner would be the person who for a time occupied a particular plot of land. Enclosure. Most of the medieval common land of England was lost due to enclosure. In English society and economic history, enclosure was the process that ended traditional rights, such as mowing meadows for hay or grazing livestock on common land, formerly held in the open field system. Once enclosed, these uses of land became restricted to the owner, and the land ceased to be for the use of the commoners. Under enclosure, such land was fenced, enclosed, and deeded or entitled to one or more owners. The process of enclosure became a widespread feature of the English agricultural landscape during the 16th century. By the 19th century, unenclosed commons were largely restricted to large areas of rough pasture in mountainous places and relatively small residual particles of land on the lowlands. And then we get this General Enclosure Act, which sanctioned large-scale land reform. It's one of the many parliamentary enclosures that consolidated strips in the open fields into more compact units and enclosed much of the remaining pasture. So anyway, it's interesting. So I'm going to make my way to the chat, and we'll see what we've got here. So let's see. All right. So Ceres discovery degree was indeed 23 plus Taurus. I was going to get to that today. That is my Mars, 23 plus Taurus. So that's kind of fun. The classical planets, there are no holes, someone's going to argue. The classical planets fill them in perfectly. One ruler for a diurnal sign and one for the nocturnal signs. Okay, well, I again, as I said earlier, you can do that. Do the traditional scheme. I actually think it's cool. I really do. But once you start adding Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, now we've got 2 holes, right? So if we're going to connect those with those signs, there are 2 holes that are not filled. That's what I'm going to say today. And I use that high tone of voice because, of course, the ancient astrology has that very like, this is this is, and it is elegant, actually. I think it is elegant. I think it is quite nice. But I don't think it's like a religion we all have to follow. Okay, this is not a religion. Astrology is an ever-evolving way that we understand ourselves and our lives and see our lives reflected through the heavens. Things evolve, like we discover planets, like Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Ceres, Chiron, all these things. Chiron is considered by some a minor planet, by the way. It's one of the classifications. Also, he's comet-like, but anyway. So I think there's always as above, so below. There's always an evolution. And I think that astrology should evolve, and life evolves and changes. I mean, look at how many things have changed over the last couple hundred years. Life isn't like it was in many ways before. So we need new symbols, I think. Certainly the astrologers have done that. We've come up with new planets and understood them to understand things more in a more complex way. So I really don't have an issue with anyone sticking to traditional. I use it when I use Vedic, but I do think that we get a better, more complex way to look at things when we add more to the system, and it works. And so I'm only telling you guys things I've really, really found to work, as I'm mentioning. Ceres is masculine? No. Did you delineate? No. So someone's asking, did I delineate specific benefic properties that I've identified for Ceres? There is, I think Kelly's keyword was abundance for Ceres. So there is a lot of abundance. Again, maybe it's too cute, but perfect grandma. Okay, let me show you a perfect grandma. I was talking to Lynn Hayes, who we mentioned her earlier because she was mentioned that she had found, Saul wrote about her, quoted her, and said that she had found that Ceres was like a higher octave of the moon. So I want to point something out about Stephen Forrest. Right? You guys probably know who he is, right? And Stephen's like an incredibly nice guy, right? And so I find his Ceres placement extremely interesting. He's got 24 degrees of Scorpio rising. Now let's imagine we have an equal house chart. That's going to make Ceres conjunct the equal house 10th house because it's exactly 90 degrees behind his ascendant. So I'll recast this chart momentarily here as a equal house chart. So here's Stephen Forrest, and their Ceres like really conjunct that 10th house cusp. And I was talking to Lynn one time, and I was like, he's so nice. He's like, you see his chart. He's like a grandma. He's just kind, right? This Leo. When Leo's good, it's kind, right? It's generous. It's warm. And I think that's one of the things that's so interesting about him. Like he's such a nice figure like that. He's such a kind figure like that. So kind of an example of their being the perfect grandma. So she will enhance things in the chart like Jupiter, but in many ways in a better way than Jupiter. There isn't quite the masculine excess about it. Like sometimes Jupiter's way too much of a good thing, or has this ego about it, or has a sense of entitlement about it. In many ways, I like Ceres more than Jupiter because she has that feminine, supportive, nurturing quality. I don't see a lot of ego in Ceres. I don't see that really, Let me tell you one of the stories that helped me to start to discover, oh, I guess I should be looking at this. I'll get back to the chat, and I'm sorry I'm coming in and out of that. And I do appreciate all the comments. So Kelly had introduced me to Ceres, right? So I'm 31 years old. We're going to go to the first part of the year 2007. And I had just done my first Blast Astrology conference, and I had a baby. So my kid there is a baby, and me and my wife at the time, we take a trip over to California. She has an aunt and uncle in Santa Barbara. So we go over there, and we're driving up and down the coast of California in this kind of central California area. And as we're driving, I recall, hey, you have this Neptune, you have this Perrin. It's a Neptune and Ceres Perrin. Goes right through Flagstaff. We used to love going up to Flagstaff and dancing and hearing music, kind of more of a college scene. The band we used to always go up there and listen to was called Mother Bus. Mother. So there it is. Neptune is the music, Ceres is the mother. We used to love Mother Bus. There was indeed a woman who was the lead singer of the band, and she let us crash in her place one time. Very generous, like Ceres is. Here, stay in my place, right? Ceres loves the people. She takes good care of the people. She has no ego like that. So anyway, we're driving up here. We're going from Santa Barbara. We're going to check out all these places. We end up going up to Morro Bay and San Luis Obispo and places like that. So I said, so this is back in 2007 before I probably didn't have a cell phone then. I held out on that until like 2015. So I recall that she has this. Now I have my laptop in my car. And so I got to pull out my laptop and pull up this map just like this in order to find out where this is. And my idea is, let's just go there and see what happens. And you can kind of see the way it really is distinctive in terms of the curve of the land right here, right? So I could really find it on the map. So I literally have to go to an atlas, a physical atlas, and it shows, exit, 57, exit, whatever. And it literally shows all the exits. And I can tell which exit that is, right? Based on the curve of the land and all that. So I'm like, let's just see what happens. Let's just get off on the highway, just see what happens. So this is the beginning of my journey with really my real significant journey with Ceres. So what happens right off this exit? This sounds like a dream. It doesn't even sound real, but this is real. Now a little bit. Let me just preface this a little bit. We almost went to Colorado on this trip instead, and we were going to go to the hot springs up in Colorado. So that we loved hot springs. We almost did that. Instead, we go to here, and I'm like, hey, let's just check this out. And I'm just curious, So here's what happens. There's a hot spring business right there. What's really stunning about it is it was like a combination of a hot spring with like an Italian restaurant. They had like pizza and subs and stuff like this. Now, Ceres is the grain goddess. She was discovered by Giuseppe Piazzi. You can spell pizza very easily out of the letters in his last name. And isn't pizza one of the like nicest, happiest things that everybody just loves? Everybody loves pizza, It's just a happy thing. That's Ceres. She's like pizza. Okay. So she's just a happy thing like that in her own nature. And it was even magical what happened because our baby stayed asleep. He was like 6 months old. He stayed asleep for like a half an hour, which is weird because we took him up, carried his kid seat in there, and he just chilled. He slept. We actually got to go in the hot springs, and it's kind of pool for a while, like before he woke up. And then we meet these kids there. They're really sweet kids, the people who own the place, I think maybe it was, and that their kids are nice. And it was just this happy vibe, like this happy family. We didn't actually order any, Italian food, but we could have. It was right there. And that was right exactly there, right? So this is one of the favorite examples, if you've heard me speak before, you might have heard this one before. And it's an illustration of how powerful a parent is when you go specifically exactly to it, right? I mean, super exactly to it. And there was no sign to indicate that there's a hot spring off this exit. It was just like a numbered exit. There's no indication of anything. And we just go right into this magic, right? So let me introduce one of the pairings I really like, Neptune and Ceres. I've seen this one work really nicely for people, a lot. And, often it's a nice connection with nature, with water, with music, like Mother Bus, or, they go to Germany and they explore this incredible old castle. So when a client is looking for an amazing connection with nature, this is what I recommend. Neptune and Ceres pairing, if I can find it and everything else checks out. I love this for connecting with nature. I have a chart of a friend. I almost had put her in my notes. I wish I had done that, but I could show you. But I have a friend and a client. She has the same parent, Neptune and Ceres. She has it right up in here. She lives in Port Townsend, and it's like right below Port Townsend. I could pull it up and show you, but it's right there. And I was talking to her earlier this year, and I was saying, you have this line right there, and I was starting to talk about it. And she said, well, it's interesting. There's this one park or like nature preserve or something like that. There's some place she loves to go to connect with nature, connect with all of that. And I'm like, hey, can we just look it up? I'm just curious where it is. And I do the coordinates. I look it up. It is exactly where her Neptune and Ceres parent is. So Neptune's a little underrated, I think, when he's good. Neptune is a lot of things. But if you make Neptune nice, it is like a dream come true. It's a fairy tale. It's sweet. It's mystical. It's nature. It's music. It's art. It's dance. It's like there's something about getting this flow with Neptune. And so Ceres. So imagine the math we're doing here. We have Neptune, and he's just hanging out. He's god of the sea. He's got nothing to do. Ceres walks up to him, and and so what happens for Neptune is he gets supported by the perfect grandmother. And Neptune is in a great mood now, and he says, here, let me show you how good life can be, how magical it can be. That's a Neptune-Ceres pairing, and it's very consistently like that. It's very, very, anything can be a little different than you might expect. If something is true 90% of the time, there might be 10% of the time it kind of goes the other way. So, if this one is challenging, there might be like some sort of too much Neptune in some respect, but I very rarely see that in actual practice. So this is one of the ones I really like. Okay, I'm going to tell you one other little story here. So we also go up to Brighton Bush Hot Springs at one point. Oh, that's so funny. I forgot. I didn't realize she had this line right there too. I'd forgotten that. Okay, so now we're looking at the sun in Ceres. Now we're going to talk about the sun in Ceres briefly here. My ex has it at 44.75 north. It's 44.45, which is 44.75. I have it also in this area. And so we go up here to Brighton Bush Hot Springs. And so there's mine right above that a little bit. 45.08, so it's about 45.15. So I have 45.15. She had it 44.75. Okay. So I think I still might have this. Oh, I think I closed it. Okay. So I'll show you. This is one of the ways you can just get the precise coordinates. Brighton Bush, latitude. Oh, last time I went there, it actually had me go to the map and then pull it up. But it's actually 44.77. Wow. So that's like 2 miles from where my wife had the Sun Ceres Perrin. Holy cow. I didn't even know that. I forgot that. I probably did at one point. So literally, she had 44.75. This is 44.77. Mine is just a little bit above that. It's 55.15. So for Perrins, anything within a degree can be pretty significant, but especially when it's close, especially when it's closer. But within 1 degree, you should consider that it's going to have some play. So what happens when we go to Brighton Bush Hot Springs? Now, mine does a bunch of other things. You can see I have a Pluto line crossing a Pluto line. There's another part to the story too. But so we go up here for what reason? I don't know how many of you guys know Jayutal. Jayutal is this kind of, new age Hindu kirtan rock star kind of guy. So he's really a great musician, and he writes these beautiful songs that, are using a lot of the ancient Sanskrit stuff, but he makes it cool and fun and modern and all that. So I've been to, I think 2 or 3 of his kirtan workshops. So what he did is he just hosted a retreat up there. Everybody comes up there, you sing your heart out to God, and you eat what they have to offer to eat. So first of all, the sun is Jayutal. He's a rock star. Okay. He's a guy, he's a man, he's a rock star. He is singing to God's, glory, through the Hindus, more pantheon. And so that's what we do. We hang out and we're just blissing out, on all this kind of spiritual music. So that's a sun thing. I guess in my wife's case, I probably encourage her to go, and I'm her husband. And then there's Jayutal, and he's the rock star. So there we go. There's the sun. Now the Ceres part of it, I don't know if you guys have ever been there, but they grow their own food on this property. It's all off the grid, basically. And they use like some kind of hydrothermal heat thing. It's amazing what they do up there. I can't describe it very well, but when you go in there to eat, it is an all-you-can-eat buffet of the best natural, wholesome food you've ever had in your life. This is also Ceres, right? This cornucopia of perfect food. So Ceres is often like a food thing like that. You might work in a restaurant or a health food store or something like that on a Ceres line. It's not uncommon to see, food stories, and in general, they're good. If you have someone who has an eating disorder, yes, you will tend to see Ceres show up in that way too. So, these are the first 2 events that I came across, and now I get really curious, right? Okay, wait a minute, maybe this is really, really good. Maybe she is just awesome. And so I start to look at it more and more and more. I ask, anytime my client has lived on a Ceres Perrin, I ask them about it. And this is how I know she is who she is, and she's as awesome as she is. Now, not every Ceres Perrin is going to be great. So when she combines with the more malefics, I don't usually like to recommend them, because it's, let's say she's with Mars. And actually, I got to show you some really stunning stuff about this. And we're going to get into some current history here in America, getting into a heavy subject here, which is police brutality against African Americans. And there's some really stunning things that we see when we look at this. So Ceres and Mars is not so great. I had a client not this year. She was in a place in Ireland. There's a city called, they call it Stab City. That's like its nickname, Stab City. Okay, because people get stabbed there. There's a lot of crime or whatever. It's a Ceres Mars Perrin. It's right there. While she's there, she's like on a bus. Someone throws a bottle and it hits her in the head and nearly knocks out like her, could have knocked out her eyesight. It was really dangerous and close. I think it was Ceres. It was definitely Ceres Mars, and there was another one too. It might have been, there's something involving the moon or the sun, because remember the eyes were almost involved, so that'd be sun and moon. But and I asked her, was it a beer bottle? Because I'm thinking there must be grains involved here somewhere. And she says, yes, actually, it was a beer bottle. So that's a Stab City example. You know, let that one stick in your mind for Ceres Mars. Now, when you have Ceres combining with a more tough planet like Mars, now she's still the perfect grandma. She wants to still help out Mars. And just because of her nature, she can't help expand some of that, what that is. So she's going to help Mars out. So if a Ceres Mars parent is good, you're going to have a good Mars type experience. You're going to do something sweaty, physical. I had one client where for a little while, maybe, I don't know, 1 to 3 months, she was in the woods with a bunch of people, and had chainsaws. I think they were working a fire thing, and she enjoyed it. She enjoyed all the physical stuff. They're out there close to nature, cutting down trees and trying to save people from fires. Kind of a Mars thing, Mars story too there, right? So not so good in general, you know. I mean, if you're a boxer, okay, maybe, you know, maybe like that, because Ceres will help Mars. So if that is good, it's good for Mars stuff. But in reverse, you have Mars, who is like a punk beating up on a grandma and taking her lunch money, you know. That's what Ceres Mars is more like. It's more disruptive for the abundance in your life. So it's going to disrupt the happy, yummy, supportive, positive stuff. So yummy is one of my favorite words for Ceres. It's kind of like pizza. I don't know. She's so yummy. She's so nice. You know, Saturn Ceres also, I don't recommend that one unless maybe you really want to enhance Saturn specifically. Maybe a career thing, maybe connection with an elder that you have in your life, maybe something real estate. These are things that I give to Saturn. But overall, it's not good. Overall, Saturn Ceres parents, you'll find that people have tough family stuff go on. It's not so great. It's not so fun. It's just a heavier kind of thing. So the question I got inspired by here was, you know, how do you define her as a benefic and so on, right? So I think you're getting a feeling for that. She's earthy, she's supportive, she's abundant, she's sensual, she's yummy. She's like that perfect grandma energy. It feels like that with a good Ceres position. Now, let me show you something really stunning about this. Okay, so we're going to look at Rodney King, George Floyd, and Tyree Evans. Sorry, no, it was not Tyree Evans. What is his name? I had his chart. Did I not save it? Tyree Nichols. There he is, Tyree Nichols. Tyree Nichols was the guy who was pulled over and beaten by 5 black cops in Memphis earlier this year, part of their Scorpion unit. So here's one of the first things when I think of thinking of Ceres in the news, right? Like a significant Ceres thing that has happened. And I think of the first thing I think of is George Floyd, right? So this is the black man who in Minneapolis was, you know, the cop had his knee on his neck for like 8 or 9 minutes or something like that, and just kills him, right? Just kills him. This is what was going on at the time. I found this time being the time that he had died from an Astro Data Bank chart. Part of what I think is super interesting about this is look at Mars and Ceres. They're both at 8 degrees or you know, the 9th degree of Pisces. So here's Ceres being that benefic who enhances a thing, expands a thing. Unfortunately, in this case, it is brutality, right? So Mars benefits, and so the mean guy kills a dude super unfairly. Another part that's very interesting about this story, and with now you're going to see a Pisces quality to this. As George Floyd was dying, I don't know if you remember, but he calls out to his mother. As when people are dying or they're about to die, they often see their relatives. A friend of mine had his father die this year. He was hanging out with him in the hospital, and his dad starts saying, "Do you see grandma? Do you see our relatives?" And he's like, "No, Dad, I don't see them." He died that night. So this is one of the things that happens, right? So he literally sees his mom. You know, you see the Pisces piece of this a little bit. There's this ethereal ghost kind of thing. He sees his mom, calls out to her in front of everybody, right? We watch this guy die. So there's such brutality in this, right? And literally, you know, this loss. Now, look at where Mars is right here. 8 degrees, 44 minutes of tropical Pisces, 8:44. This blows me away. Look at this. Is it this one? It's this one. Rodney King, who in the early 90s was the first famous example of a black dude getting beat up by the cops, and it was filmed, right? And that's why we all knew about it, and that's why it was such a big deal. That's why the LA riots happened. This is a big moment in the consciousness around this. Look at his Ceres and his Saturn. 544, 1145. What's the midpoint of 544 and 1145? It is 844 or 845. Where was Mars when George Floyd was killed, murdered? 844. It's the exact precise midpoint of Rodney King's Ceres and Saturn. Now, Rodney King was born with Mars opposite Saturn. It's not hard to see the police brutality element of Mars and Saturn. Saturn's authority, Mars is often the tough guys, in uniform and so on. Uranus is involved here, so it becomes famous. It's filmed, right? Pluto's in there, and it's obviously a brutal thing. But in a way, I don't know, Ceres' influence here is very interesting. It's like, did this, this was brought to light. This was seen. Because it was seen, it began a journey for America, to kind of figure some of this stuff out. And it's a brutal thing. Again, Ceres gets beat up by Saturn here. Ceres gets beat up by Mars, well, even in the opposition here, or in the case with the death of George Floyd. So this is a pattern that you see show up sometimes with a lot of these events that have been happening. When Tyree Nichols was pulled over and beaten by 5 black cops and killed. This is another one we see. Mars was retrograde earlier this year, and at the end of last year it was retrograde. And retrograde Mars is a lot more likely to be a weird, intense Mars story than when it's direct even. And it's in a trine to Ceres. So that was kind of interesting. When Rodney King is beaten, I thought I had that one here. What I had them. Maybe I didn't save that one. Oh, here it is. Rodney King beaten at the top. Mars and the Moon were in a virtually exact trine. Look at how exact that is. 1445 and 1446. So these connections from the Moon to Mars or Ceres to Mars, that shows up with a lot of these types of events. And it makes me realize, well, who's grieving these guys? It's often their mothers. Right? You see their mothers sometimes on TV. My son was killed because he was holding up a water gun or something like that. So anyway, that's some powerful, intense stuff. Ceres was discovered. Someone brought up her discovery at 23 degrees of Taurus. My Mars is 23 degrees of Taurus. And here I am taking a very Martian approach to this. I'm arguing hard for her, right? I've tested it for decades. Like, I've been looking at this for a long time, and this is one of the main things I get really passionate about in astrology. So this is when she was discovered. Now, Ray Grassi here, we also got into this good conversation about how he brought up the fact that when these planets have been discovered, these new planets, he said, I came across something curious when I was looking at Ceres here. It's been commented on by a few astrologers over the years how Saturn was so prominent in the discovery charts of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, respectively. Saturn opposite Uranus, Saturn conjunct Neptune, Saturn opposite Pluto. Check out the Ceres discovery chart. A very tight, within a few minutes of arc, square between Saturn and Ceres. Okay. Now, and that's the tightest one out of all of these. I looked at them today. That's the really tight one. And so my point was, and she was in the sign that I take to be her rulership in the modern scheme of astrology. Kelly Lee Phipps wrote about that. And I said, it's as if they were pushing on Saturn's boundaries, saying there is more out there. You traditional astrologers, there's more out there, And I don't mean to give you guys too much crap about that, because I think as long as you have an elegant, balanced system, you're doing it right. And at this point, modern astrology, it doesn't have an elegant, balanced system because we got 2 holes in the system. But I do believe Kelly figured it out, and I promote the same thing he did. So no, Ray's comment was, I hadn't thought of it that way before. I don't remember who said it, but another theory I heard coming from the other side of the equation was that those bodies needed the crystallizing force of Saturn in order to congeal into manifestation. And I said, each discovery is revolutionary to the traditional order. So interesting, right, as far as the discovery charts on these planets. I think the other one that was tightest was Neptune. Here's where Neptune was discovered. Now, obviously, it's not the exact time and place. But we have Neptune conjunct Uranus. Did I say that wrong? I did say that wrong. Saturn conjunct Neptune at the 26th degree of Aquarius. And part of what's interesting with that is like, this is kind of the, the number of things we could connect to that time. And I hadn't realized the abolitionist movement was so connected with the discovery of Uranus, or sorry, Neptune, right? This compassion for people who have different colored skin. I mean, geez, right? But that was one of the things that did happen around that time. There's a lot more of the spiritualism that was coming about at that time. There's some things related to oil, which then gets into plastics. But this kind of the spiritualism is kind of the start of the New Age stuff, right? And Aquarius is so connected with a lot of the New Agey stuff. It just is. You just see that all the time. So I think that was pretty interesting that Saturn was involved in that one. So that's an interesting point right over there. Just make sure there's no charts here that I really wanted to get to, that I don't want to forget anything here. Okay. Well, let me give you an example. So we're talking about Sun Ceres as a parent. So this was one of my interesting examples. All right. So there's this woman who's a client of mine, and I had recommended to her, Sun Ceres is one of the better lines. I would say, and I would say this for trying to find a guy, trying to find a good guy. So she moves pretty exactly to where I said this parent is. Here it is, a little bit south of Charlotte, North Carolina. And she stays there. She does all this manifestation work. She goes through this book that's all about trying to pull in your good partner. And she pulls in a good partner for a while. Now, this used to be one of my success stories. I used to say she went there, she met the guy. But I checked in with her just this last week to make sure that I'm not mistelling what actually happened in that story, because I don't want to lie to you guys. And just this weekend, or just like within the last week, it does look like they're actually splitting up. But part of what's interesting about it is she leaves this position where it's the Sun Ceres in this very protective energy. And in the first couple of years of the relationship, whenever I had a session with her, she said nothing but good things about them. He was great. It was awesome. I just heard nothing but good stuff, pretty much. Now, I did start to look at their synastry, and I was like, well, I see some issues here. And I started to explore those with her a little bit. And she did admit, okay, well, yeah, this is an issue, and this is an issue. Now that it seems to be ending, it's more like she seems to be seeing a lot more of the negative in the situation. But she does move to Asheville because he's in Asheville. So he's like a professor in Asheville. And that's when, after she moved to be with him, that's when things got weird. Now, Asheville is between a Moon-Neptune parent and a Moon-Neptune parent. There's a Moon-Neptune parent near Boone. There's a Moon-Neptune parent south of Asheville. So I tell people all day long, I don't really like that parent for relationships. It does not really work very well. So I definitely had some reservations about this. I definitely wasn't sure I liked what it would do. Now, on the other hand, here's the guy, and this is very interesting because he's on a parent in Asheville, Jupiter and Ceres. Guess what he does for a living? He's a professor. He's a tenured professor. That's very Jupiterian, right? Being a professor. So he gets this sweet job as a professor on what? His Jupiter Ceres parent. There's astrology. Astrology, you guys might know. Freedom is a Vedic astrologer. He lived on a Jupiter Ceres parent around the Bay Area, and he told me he did so much teaching there. And they recorded so many videos. It was just like so much. So Jupiter Ceres, I do like as a parent. You have the two great benefics together. You're going to have some abundance there. And I've seen people have really good luck with like advisors, right? So maybe a doctor or a lawyer, or who knows, maybe even an astrologer or something. But they particularly had these good advisors there. Teaching is a thing here. Here's another teaching example. Now, part of why I was nervous about this is for him, he has a local space line of Mars that goes right to Asheville, and Mars is really common with breakups and divorces. A little bit east of that, we get Pluto, Uranus, and Chiron. So they were wanting to move in together. They're wanting to move up there, and I did my best to say like, okay, well, I wouldn't want to be too close to the Mars line, but it's right there, and I would try to stay on this line because I think that's a good one for him. But anyway, they move up there, and I think some of the issues got worse. And so I think it's interesting that it changed after she'd moved off that Sun Ceres parent. And now I mentioned that Ceres I find to have his fall in Capricorn. Now this guy has an interesting placement. He has Ceres in Capricorn, double Capricorn as I call it, because it's also in the Vedic chart. And it's with his 9th house cusp here in Porphyry. So what does he do? He's a professor. And I think he's involved with classics, which, Capricorn old stuff too, right? And so sweet job, professor, boom. And this is really an obvious way to see it in the chart. It's super obvious that he would have some incredible 9th house opportunity. Now, being that the planet is in his fall, this is the thing I think is not understood about planets in difficult sign positions. I mean this about detriment to some extent, yes, but more so fall. Fall is a much more serious issue than detriment. What happens when a planet starts to fall essentially is the sign, and this is what is not understood and needs to be understood. The sign becomes a strength. It becomes a superpower. It is awesome for the person. That's why you see Jupiter and Capricorn people do generally really well in their careers. They can make some money. Like they can do Capricorn stuff very well. A, Jupiter's enhancing it, but B, it's a fallen placement. The thing is that the planet struggles more. So Ceres is not comfortable in Capricorn. It's like the middle of winter. It's cold. It's not like, hey, I get to feed everybody, be sweet all the time, right? It's not her place. She loves Cancer. She loves to be that nurturing mom who's feeding everybody in Cancer. That's where she's exalted. She finds her happy place there. Capricorn is a different story. So in this case, it's good for the Capricorn side. You get a job as a tenured professor teaching classics on a Jupiter Ceres parent. Okay, but what she said in the end, when she's, toward the end, she's talking about what didn't really go well in their relationship, she felt like he didn't really have quite enough of a capacity for empathy. Like there's an emotional piece that wasn't quite there. And that's also, he also has moon in Scorpio, and tends to be often like that, where the moon is challenged in Scorpio. So the soft side of things and the nurturing side of things, that's not as developed in Scorpio moon people. They have great intensity. They're really passionate about sex. They're really powerful about confronting things and healing subjects, right? So there's a good thing about having the moon in Scorpio, but it's Scorpio. It's not the moon. The moon is struggling. She's got a blind spot there. She doesn't know what to do in that sign. I have Venus in Virgo, so my Venus struggles with some things. Like I gotta be mellower sometimes, right? I gotta be a little more laid back. I gotta relax a little more. But my Virgo, I gotta say, is a strength for me. I feel pretty healthy at 48 years old. I've always been into like eating well. I love to kind of figure this stuff out and take it all apart, put it back together. Like I love my job. I love figuring out all these things, and I see Virgo as nothing but good in my life as far as what Virgo is for me. Like the significations of Virgo, those are all great in my life, basically. But my Venus has, has more issues. So that's part of what has to be understood about fallen planets. And so the modern astrologers just throw the baby out with the bathwater and like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear that it's in his fall. I don't want to pay attention to that, right? It's really weird that they completely ignore a super fundamental part of the astrological tradition, because it can be understood in a good way, in a way that you understand it and it enriches your understanding of a chart. And the traditional astrologers, they tend to be like bad, and that's not very interesting either. Actually, it's a great strength and a great challenge. And the challenge is that you have to develop that planet that you have a blind spot around. You're not that awake around that planet. Your intelligence around that planet is super low. You're stupid around that planet. Let's put it that way. My Venus, I'm stupid around Venus stuff sometimes, because she's in Virgo. So you get to work on becoming smarter about how you manage that planet. The people who have it exalted, it's the opposite. They're very smart about how to handle that energy. Venus and Pisces people, they get Venus. They're, not to say they don't have their own issues, because exaltation can be too much of a good thing, right? So too much Pisces, too much Venus, and you can do the math on that too. But it's not that their Venus has a huge blind spot. They know Venus, basically, right? They know how to do art, or they know how to be kind and loving and sweet and gentle. Like they have Venus assets that just come really naturally to them. Those of us with planets in their fall, we pay a price for the gifts that we have, is kind of how that works out. And so you got to work on the planet. Anyway, here's a Ceres in Capricorn example where, yeah, career's good. Yeah, they actually move into a lake house owned by his parents. So Ceres does have some wateriness, and again, she contains more water than the Earth probably in terms of ice. So they move to a lake house from the parents. His mother's involved. It's great. It's abundant. It's a nice place, right? So Capricorn stuff, like the physical stuff, like here's a good career, here's a good home you can live in, here's the lake house. But it's the emotional side of it, the nurturing side of it. That's what was challenging for her with him. So that is an example I wanted to bring in here as well. I'm going to go back to the chat, I think, in a minute. I'm just going to look over my notes here and see some of the things that I might not have mentioned that I really did want to mention. So one of the obvious things about Ceres being connected with Taurus, by the way, is if you assign Pluto to Scorpio, guess what's opposite Scorpio? Taurus. Guess who I'm saying, as Kelly said, is the modern ruler of Taurus? Ceres. Doesn't it make sense that Hades and Ceres would be opposed to each other? Jupiter and Ceres, I was mentioning, maybe they have a little bit of maybe Jupiter's a little jealous, So Jupiter's like, yeah, go, yeah, Hades, you can go take her daughter. I don't care about that. That's fine. Go take her daughter. Jupiter only changes his mind after it hurts his bottom line. There aren't enough people are going hungry. They're not happy with the gods. They're not worshiping me. You got to give the daughter back, is what Jupiter says to Hades at that point. So They are brother and sister, but you know, there is something to being that feminine energy. You know, I mean, the Tao Te Ching talks about the value of the feminine, the value of the small. You know, the Tao Te Ching says things like the sage just fills people's bellies; they don't fill their mind. You know, they just make them happy, and they just, you know, they're not there trying to like be too intellectual. So there's this nice spiritual femininity in a way to Ceres, and she really is a full-fledged character. So again, going back to why she is so different than the other asteroids, because she's what I'm talking about. And yes, she has her particular meanings, but if you miss the big picture, that she is up there with the rest, and she is the great benefic we have been missing out on. How exciting is that? You have another benefic to look at people's charts that's on par with Jupiter, you know? So I'll show you mine real quick, right? So I have Ceres in Gemini, in tropical, and she's in Taurus in my Vedic chart. Okay, well, if you do whole signs, what's Gemini? It's my 8th house. Now, the 8th house is the house connected with astrology. A lot of the traditional astrologers think it's the 9th. Kind of in their system, it is a bit. But the 9th is all the higher knowledge, like all the philosophy and all the things that expand your mind. The 8th house is more specific to esoteric stuff, astrology, for example. And you see that all the time if you really watch transits in people's chart. When they get into really studying astrology, you see the 8th house show up over and over and over. So one of the best things to do with an 8th house transit is get into astrology, study astrology. So 8th house is astrology much more specifically than the 9th house is. So I have Ceres in the 8th house. And guess who introduced me to astrology? My mom. Over here, you see the moon is in the 8th house if you do a quadrant system. So my mom was studying astrology when I was in the womb. That's why I'm talking to you guys today about this stuff, because of my mom. So I have the moon and Ceres, and both of these are mother figures. They're both, if you want to see the mother in someone's chart, look at the moon, look at Ceres, also look at Venus. Venus is also very relevant to that. So you can get a picture of the mother from those planets. Like they're going to connect to that. And sometimes one will connect more than the others, you know? But yeah, 8th house moon with the moon in Cancer rulership, and then the 8th house Ceres with Ceres in Taurus in my sidereal chart. And my mom, you know, is the reason why I have a profession today, because I do astrology, and that's pretty neat. Again, the only article I ever got published in Mountain Astrologer today was about Taurus. I think that's pretty interesting, you know. The only one was specifically just about Taurus. And so if you go to like my Vedic chart, you'll see my 8th house has Mars in Taurus, South Node in Taurus, Ceres in Taurus. So South Node is essentially the mystical weird stuff, like astrology. Mars is a scientific, practical, grounded approach to things. So I do locational astrology. I help people figure out where to live. It's very grounded. And I use Ceres, and I talk about her a lot, and I use Ceres a lot to help people find their awesome places on Earth. Kind of neat. Let's talk a little bit about some of these other parents. So we talked about the Sun Ceres. So I would still, let me give you another Sun Ceres story real quick. A woman who has her ex, she has a daughter, and her ex lives up in the Bay Area. I think she was living in Arizona at the time. She has a Sun and Ceres parent up in the Bay Area where her ex is, and her ex hasn't been much of a father, but he is running a dispensary, a marijuana dispensary, and making 6 figures every single month, is what she told me. It sounded like a lot of money. From what? From the earth, from the abundance of the earth, from weed, from marijuana. So she moves up there, and she's thinking, well, maybe we'll get back together. You know, let's see if we can work it out, all this kind of thing. They don't work it out. She moves, doesn't work out. I think she moves again. But what did happen is they reconnected enough so that he starts to really support her daughter. So all of a sudden she's getting money, real money now from him. So that's a very Sun Ceres story. The father of her daughter, who's making 6 figures a month from the earth, from plants, starts really supporting her daughter. Interesting, right? Because the daughter thing is a part of Ceres. So this is a positive daughter story involving Ceres. She gets money from him because he's running a dispensary. So Sun Ceres, I do love it. It is a great line. It can support health. I've seen people say that they got healthier on a Sun Ceres line because the sun is connected to your vitality and your health as well. Generally, it's good for career. Generally, it's a good line. Moon in Ceres is a nice one. One of the stories that always sticks in my head with Moon Ceres is a client who was living in LA for a very long time and just had this incredible knack on a Moon Ceres parent for continually finding these perfect places to live, these perfect little cottage, you know, places that like just are magical and sweet and gentle. So then there's Ceres again saying, here, my child, have a beautiful cottage to live in for not that much money in LA, right? It's like such good luck with like moon stuff for her. Now Moon and Ceres, we definitely have two mother symbols going on there, right? So what's the story with the mother? That becomes relevant. Could there be issues with the mother? Sure. Like there might be. Could it be very positive with the mother? Yes, it also could be that. So you got to look at more pieces of that puzzle. Because again, when Ceres is challenging, there is some grief. There is some grief and loss, or there are some issues with the mother. So you got to be careful with Ceres lines. So let me say this before we get too far into it. If you with Ceres in Capricorn, so that's the fault. That's the one you really got to watch out for with Ceres. But also Scorpio for two reasons. One, it's the detriment position to Taurus. And two is that Scorpio is always intense, right? So Ceres and Scorpio, you definitely see some intense stories. In fact, I saw one when I was looking at these guys here. Here's George Floyd, was it? Here's George Floyd. Now, you see Ceres is in Sag here, but if you do Vedic astrology, and this is not a timed chart, we don't have his birth time, but in Vedic astrology, he has Ceres and Scorpio, and I actually use both zodiacs. I think they work extremely well. You just have to understand how they work together, and everything just fits into place, and you know, the stars align, and the birds chirp, and the angels sing, and you get it, and you get astrology, because there are two great traditions, and we're schizophrenic, we're completely divided between them, and we need to figure out how to bring these things together, and it's not that hard. Tropical is up close and personal, very, very much felt like the seasons. Sidereal is much more objective and distant. It's much more just the straight facts about a thing. So if we talk about the blind man and the elephant, the tropical astrologers are up in the elephant. They're like smelling his breath, that they're holding his tail and smelling his rear end, and you know, they're feeling that's what tropical astrology is like. You feel the stuff up close. It's very personal. Sidereal astrology is like seeing that elephant from every possible angle at an objective distance, where you can actually, you know, get all of that. So that's the difference between tropical and sidereal. Once you put those together, boom, everything just comes together for you. So anyway, here's an example of Ceres and Scorpio. That's when we do his sidereal chart. It's conjunct the North Node, and yada yada. So Ceres and Scorpio, you got to be more careful with that one too. Capricorn also. Now, if it's retrograde in Scorpio or it's retrograde in Capricorn, that can be a much better situation. Retrograde on the one hand can be a little weird and intense, so maybe not. But retrograde is another thing I've found to be super true and important in astrology that is not very well understood. I learned it from a Vedic school. When you have a retrograde, the planet will give results as if it is also in the opposite sign. That's the short version of it. So if you have Ceres in, let's say, Scorpio, but retrograde, it can also give you results as if it's in Taurus. If it's in Capricorn, but retrograde, it can also give you results as if it's in Cancer. Recently, with this Mercury retrograde we're going through right now, Mercury's in Virgo, it's retrograde. A couple of the big stories, a few of the big stories, well, two of them involve water. Burning Man, absolute Mercury retrograde story, right? Burning Man's like too much rain, everybody's trapped there. It's Pisces, it's too much water. There's a hurricane that hit Florida, and it's part of Florida that hasn't been hit in like 100 years. It's like once in a 100-year type area to get hit in Florida. Again, water. Now we also have the earthquake in Morocco. That's the Virgo side of it. That's the Earth. Okay, so always look at the opposite sign with a retrograde planet. And so why this is known more so by the Vedic astrologers is the Parashara, which is one of the Vedic texts. He says that if a planet is like debilitated or in its fall and retrograde, it will act exalted. And people debate, is that exactly right, or you know, kind of right, or and essentially that's the principle. The retrograde, it involves the principle of reversal. So if you're if the planet's in its hardest sign, but retrograde, it can act like it's in its best sign. And you will see that. You'll see people who have fallen planets retrograde, that the planet acts exalted. It can very much do that. So if it's in Capricorn or Scorpio, but retrograde, we're talking about Ceres again, that might be pretty good, but it's kind of a mixed bag too. Like it's not like an easy thing to recommend. So if you're going to do locational astrology, you want to recommend a Ceres line to somebody, check it out. Is it in Scorpio or Capricorn? Whether it's retrograde or not, there's potentially an issue there. The retrograde tends to be better. The odds are better if it's actually retrograde in that particular case because of the sign reversal principle. But also then again, if it's in Taurus or Cancer in retrograde, now we get access to the opposite energy, which is not as comfortable for Ceres. So that's not as good. It's not as good in Cancer retrograde. It's not as good in Taurus retrograde. So keep that in mind if you're going to interpret Ceres. That's a very, very important thing. Otherwise you're going to treat her like, she's going to be abundant in that sign, right? You saw my Mercury in Gemini, right? I can think about things multiple ways. Like I do tropical, sidereal, all this stuff together. Like that, I think that's one of my assets. I mean, I think I'm a good writer. Like I've written a couple novels, I did all right. Like I don't have that many talents, but I think that's one of them. I think I can write a little bit. So, and I write about astrology sometimes, right? Which is more that eighth house thing. So you'll find people have a lot of their gifts, a lot of their abundance in life, coming through their series placement. When I met my girlfriend, we've been together now 21 months. So let's go back in time a little bit here, guys. I want everybody to think about your life a little while ago here. Let's go to the end of 2021. Let's see. We'll start with October 21. There was a really interesting thing going on in the heavens when you think about Ceres. So first of all, Ceres had a conjunction with the North Node September-ish, late August. So Ceres was with the North Node there. Okay, well, let's think about that time, August, September. But also, here's what happens next. Now Ceres goes retrograde here. We're at November 1st, she goes retrograde. We're at December 1st, she's retrograde again, conjunct the North Node. We'll go forward another month to January. And Ceres has gone back into Taurus, still conjunct the North Node. So this was a long visit here where Ceres can join the North Node. So think about the end of 2021 in your life. Think about where you find Gemini in your chart, maybe Taurus, and look at what expanded in your life and was very abundant. So that's when I met my girlfriend and we lived together, which really helps because rent is crazy these days. So I have a place for my kids to live. We live together. Like we have all this great synastry. Like, it's been a really awesome relationship. And I saw that coming. And see, in my case, look at Gemini, right? So that was basically like a Ceres return for me. So I'm having my Ceres return at 3, that's my sidereal, sorry. It was 3 Gemini. So I have a Ceres return conjunct the North Node in my 7th or 8th house, depending on how you do the houses. And I'm looking at thinking, I think I'm going to meet somebody. I think, because I had gotten divorced and had an interesting time dating for about 4 years, a lot of ups and downs with that. And I saw that coming up and I'm like, you know what? I think I'm actually going to meet somebody good. And it's one of the rare moments in my life when the stars seem to align like that. And sure enough, I met her in early December, and here we are. So that was a Ceres return for me. I was married for almost 19 years, and that was overall a really good situation too. So there's kind of 7th, 8th house thing. So that was a neat moment with Ceres that I think I had written about it at the time, and I remember like in the comments of the things I was writing, people seem to kind of have some connection to what I was saying about that. So really, a potential expansion of Ceres there. Now, keep in mind, when she's in early Gemini, she's in sidereal Taurus. So if you want to think about your sidereal chart, think about your whole signs, make it simple. Where's Taurus? All right. So it was the 8th house for me. So I meet my partner, we move in together, my kids are here, her kids are here, it's very, very 8th house. We're getting in there together and doing all the things. So there it was, and her moon, by the way, is in Taurus and tropical, right on my descendant. And her Venus is right on my ascendant in sidereal Libra or tropical Scorpio. So there's all this kind of like Taurus Venus, kind of energy there as well. Her Jupiter's conjunct my moon in Cancer, right? So there's all these things that are like, here's this gift. It really felt like, again, the perfect grandma saying, here's this awesome woman, hang out with her for a while. So, so that's what we're doing. Yeah, but otherwise, you're just going to look at Ceres and treat her like a female Jupiter, and see what you find. Jupiter without the kind of the ego issues, and the entitlement issues that Jupiter can very much have. Let's see. Just gonna make sure we don't have any notes here that are anything I really want to say that I'm going to regret if I don't say later. By the way, the pronunciation, I don't know. One of the videos I saw pronounced her more like Ceres. I don't know. I say Ceres because cereal comes from Ceres. We say cereal, which is another happy thing, like pizza, right? Cereal makes us happy too. The root of cereal and Ceres is the same. So Ceres, it sounds like cereal. So anyway, that's how I say it. But tomato, I'm sure is a thing as well. So here's a big picture thought, and then I'll go to the chat and see what we get. As astrologers, we want to expose people to positive things. Kelly Lee Phipps, one of his great quotes, actually, was, and I've even seen people just find this quote because I put it on like Goodreads and some quote sites maybe. And this is a really great quote from him, and it's inspired people that didn't know him. So he says, if you argue for your limitations, you get to keep them. But if you argue for your possibilities, you get to create them. Pretty powerful. And this is the guy, as far as I'm concerned, who brought us Ceres, who brought us an understanding. Now, he's not maybe the only person who said this, but he's the only guy I saw really saying it. Now, I will say this, there are French astrologers. The French wrote a bunch about Ceres. I have not read any of these books, partly because they're in French. And I don't do that. But let's see if I have the quote here. Yes, so I'm going to put these up on the screen here. So those of you who are watching, you can find these books. I asked Philip Graves, a true gentleman and scholar, you know, what are the books you have from Ceres? I said I've heard the French wrote about it a lot. So he's got a bunch of things listed here. Sadly, my French is virtually non-existent. So I'm just going to put these on the screen, and you can look into these if you wish. I wish I could read French to see what they have said about her. But there's stuff going back to the 80s where they were writing about Ceres. Meanwhile, you know, the Americans are like, you know, I do kind of disagree with the asteroid goddess approach where she's, you know, in with the other asteroids. It's not wrong because she is, and she has her own meanings like the other asteroid goddesses do. But the problem is that we didn't see the forest through the trees. We missed the big picture. That is how powerful she is as a benefic. I want to talk about, before the chat too, so some other parents I really like for her. Ceres and Mercury I like a lot. Ceres and Uranus I like a lot too, actually. What else here? Ceres Chiron is kind of a mixed bag. Sometimes if people are focused on healing, it is pretty awesome. When I went to Brighton Bush, there was also a Chiron Ceres up there. But so anyway, these are some titles here that you can check out of books that have been written on Ceres, and we have a bunch of French folks here. One quick funny example from Bruce Schofield, who commented on our Facebook post, the one I made about this talk. And he said, a suburban manifestation of Ceres I made note of years ago is lawn care. Once when the asteroid Dudu was square to my natal Ceres, I am not making this up, he says, I mowed my lawn and stepped in a serious amount of dog doo-doo, although he didn't say doo-doo. So anyway, funny example of Ceres and lawn care and some doo-doo. I think I got just about all these things here that I wanted to show you guys. This guy, you might have seen him on YouTube before. He has a really good video on Ceres. This is another like size example kind of thing. So like here's Ceres on the left. There's Vesta on the right. There's Pallas. There's Hygeia. Hygeia is the next biggest one. So we should be probably paying more attention to Hygeia. Vesta, by the way, is the only other asteroid that you can see with the naked eye under the right conditions. Ceres, you can see her with the naked eye if it's very dark sky, and then right condition must be like if she's retrograde and close to the Earth. So it is possible to see her with the naked eye, which is also very interesting. That's also true of Vesta, though. So, you know, that hearing that, I got more curious about Vesta, you know, when I had heard that. Here's another image of Ceres here. The crust of Ceres is a ratio of 90 to 10 rocks to water. I suppose that'd be 90 to 1 rocks to water. So there we are on Ceres. There is water vapor in the atmosphere. This was a good article here. I should also make sure I go through all my tabs because I did have a few things I want to show you. This one is a good article that I think some of you guys would really enjoy if you want to study the history of the asteroids. How were they characterized? When were they planets? When were they this and that? So Uranus was discovered, blah, 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 blah. So they discovered Ceres in the constellation of Taurus, the constellation of Taurus. Interesting, right? So we're not just talking about the sign of Taurus, but the constellation of Taurus she was found in. She was found exactly where Bode's Law said she would be. And so there you go with that. I want to talk about the parents. Let me just make sure I didn't miss any of these links that I really had wanted to share anything from. There's the latitude thing. We don't need that anymore. Read up on Bode's Law. Pretty interesting. You can read up on the golden ratio there. Phi. That's pretty interesting stuff. Here's Rodney King. March 3rd, 91 is when Rodney King was beaten. And Tyree Nichols. You know, Tyree Nichols, his killing did lead to some positive changes. Like they disbanded the Scorpion unit in Memphis. And there were a number of trines involved with his. If you remember, Ceres was trine Mars, was also trine Venus at the time. A little bit later, the Sun was forming a grand trine, and there were changes that were made because of him. So, in a way, some good came of it. But obviously, his mother was there grieving him, as we might expect with Ceres. Oh, here's that article that I think some of you guys would like. It's it's from the Wayback Machine. You can kind of see it here. It's USNO Navy minor planets.php. So you can kind of Google that if you want to try to find that. That one is some pretty interesting history there. This was interesting. Let's look at this here. This was the Wikipedia page, and there's this interesting part here about classification. Ceres was assigned a planetary symbol and was listed as a planet for over half a century, along with Pallas, Juno, and Vesta. Herschel coined the term asteroids. By the 1860s, astrologers were starting to accept that there was a difference between the major planets and asteroids, such as Ceres, although the word planet had yet to be precisely defined. Let's see, Pluto gets in the mix, and we start figuring out what Pluto is. So on August 24th, 2006, the Assembly adopted the additional requirement. Right, okay, so here's the global body responsible for astronomical nomenclature and classification is the IAU. They had defined a planet as a celestial body that has sufficient mass for its self-gravity to overcome rigid body forces so that it assumes a hydrostatic equilibrium, which is round, which is spherical. That it is in orbit around a star. And so in other words, not going around a planet, but going around a star like the sun, and is not a star nor a satellite of a planet. Had this been adopted, it would have made Ceres the fifth planet. She would have been defined strictly as a planet at that point. But on August 24th, that same month, the Assembly adopted the additional requirement that a planet must have cleared the neighborhood around its orbit. So Ceres is not a planet, per se, according to that nomenclature, because it does not dominate its orbit and it has to share it with thousands of other asteroids. But I do think it's neat that she's hanging out with all those asteroids. So she's, again, perfect grandma. She doesn't care. I'll feed everybody. According to, it's gonna take care of everybody, right? So Ceres instead becomes a dwarf planet. And planetary geologists still often ignore this definition and just consider Ceres to be a planet anyway. Ceres is a dwarf planet, but there's some confusion about whether it's also an asteroid, as we mentioned. Let's see, because a NASA webpage states that Vesta is the largest asteroid, which means they do not consider, according to that, Ceres an asteroid. Oh, that would explain why they got that wrong. I remember reading that and thinking, how did NASA get this wrong? It's saying that Vesta is the wait. It says that Vesta is the Bell's second. Yeah. It's because the NASA said that she was the largest asteroid, and I'm going, no, it's not. I've seen the stats. Ceres is much bigger, so maybe that's why. Now I understand why NASA seemed to get that wrong, because they just weren't considering Ceres an asteroid; they're considering her a dwarf planet. So anyway, that's kind of neat. We looked at this already. We looked at the Enclosure Act. We looked at the conversation with Ray, and this was a cool conversation. Ray goes into some stuff about Neptune, Uranus, Pluto. I'm just going to scroll through it real quick in case you're watching the video and you want to pause it and read what he says about Neptune. Here's a passage from his book Stargates. I'm just going to put this around here for a bit. The publication of Moby Dick in 1852 is a pretty fitting symbol for Neptune as well. I think that was an interesting point. Yeah, and a thing I hadn't quite realized about Neptune was the socialism and communism, how much of that happened around the discovery of Neptune, because it was Karl Marx, right? If I remember this right, Ray, I believe he published his seminal work around that time. I think so. Yeah, the publication of the Communist Manifesto was 1848. So, and he points out this is different than the discovery of Uranus, which had more of an emphasis on individualism, capitalism, like the Bible of modern capitalism, Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations, coming out in 1776. So Neptune brings in more of this collectivism, right, and communism and socialism and things like that. It's more compassionate, right? The abolitionist movement is there. So interesting difference there between Uranus and Neptune. All right, let's see. I think we got just about all the stuff here. That was Chiron I was looking into a little bit. Yeah, I think we got through all this stuff, so that's good. Okay, so I was mentioning I want to talk about couple more parents real quick. So Ceres Mercury, I'll go ahead and mention mine again on this one, because I've been on this a couple times, well, a few times. I have a couple of them in the US. I love this line. I think it's really great for writers. If you're a writer and you want to do some creative stuff, find yourself a Neptune Ceres parent and you will do some cool stuff. So here's where I have it. It's right at the north of Arizona, right at the north of New Mexico. So I lived in Durango, Colorado, right across the border from this. And I was a young guy, and I got this sweet job in a bookstore called Aquarius Adventures. And I was a young astrologer, and I got this job where I got the only office in the back of the place. I was the guy who did the readings in the place. It was a bookstore. I got the job. Me and my girlfriend at the time both wanted it. They actually gave it to me. I don't think she had this parent quite like it did. Actually, no, I take that back. She did, because we were born just like about an hour or two apart. So she must have had that too. But anyway, she got to hang out at the bookstore too. And so anyway, amazing job. There was a woman who ran it. She was a Cancer. Okay, here we go, more serious stuff. And actually, I will say, I that was one period in my life where I wrote some things. I was writing about the Osho Zen Tarot, and I wrote these things that I remember the woman who worked there reading it. It's like, did you really write this? Because it was really one of the better things I'd ever written to that point. It had like a different, I don't know, somehow I tapped into a certain kind of wisdom with that one. So I did some really neat writing there, and I taught astrology there, and I taught a young guy who was a stellium and Virgo astrology there. He became a good friend of mine. So there's a lot of Mercury Ceres symbolism there. Now here's another one. St. George, Utah, which is also right down there on that border. Here's what's really interesting with that one. This one's quite objective. So there was a guy named David Farland. He was the editor for my second book. He is a New York Times bestselling author, Mormon guy who's written tons of things and won tons of awards. I used to go up here and study writing with him. He did these writing workshops, and he was the perfect grandma as a writer, dude. He's this nice old guy, just wonderful, just super supportive. And I went to his workshops there, and then he actually gave me a blurb that I was able to put on the cover of my novel. He said some very complimentary things about me, and I put them on my book, of course, because it was the best blurb I had from the biggest author I could find. And so all kinds of Mercury magic going on for me there, right? Also over here in Vegas. And I was just there in Vegas this year when I got to see a Prince tribute show. I love Prince. And that was magical. And it was just when Pluto went into Aquarius, and I opened my journal and I wrote some amazing stuff. I organized these thoughts about, here's what I want to put in my book, and here's what I want to do with this and that and that. And it was just pouring out of me. So I really want to get back to this line to write. I could also tell you a Venus node story about Vegas, but that's for another day, I think. But so yeah, I love this one. It's very creative. I do find it tends to be in general better for people intellectually. But I just had a client just this week, and she went to the south of England on a Mercury Ceres pairing, and she had a friend who lived there, and they went and checked out the chalk cliffs and all that fun stuff. So it can be good with friends too. Mercury has a lot to do with friends. It's very creative, has a lot of intellectual meaning as well. So I like that one in general for friends, although I haven't necessarily seen it be as good for that. What I've seen be even better for friends and social matters is actually Mercury Uranus. And so this is one of the reasons that I realized that Uranus kind of makes you cool, kind of makes you popular, gives you more friends, more social connections. Ceres, perfect grandma, is saying, Uranus, have a good time. And Uranus says, yes, I'm going to get out there and be interesting to people, and have a certain charisma and share my genius with people, or just be neat and be likable and all that. So Ceres Uranus is one of the most consistent parents I have ever seen in terms of being good for social experiences. So if I see someone with the Uranus Ceres parent, I'll say, did you have a good social experience there? They will say yes 9 times out of 10. It's very, very consistent. One person said no, but she felt a lot of freedom there. So generally that one is super great also. So let's make sure we went through all the parents, right? We talked about Moon, Sun, Mercury, Venus. We haven't talked about Venus. So as you might imagine, it's a nice parent, Venus and Ceres. I've seen people have, a great circle of female friends on a line like that. I have a client who became very successful, very well known as like doing pole dance online. She has a following all over the world. Tons of people follow her. She was born on a Venus Ceres parent. She's really connected to a lot of feminine goddess energy as well. So Venus Ceres is quite feminine and quite nice for a lot of things. While we're at it, since I just mentioned that example, the parents that you're born under are pretty significant in terms of your life. So it's almost like a part of your natal astrology that you might not have ever paid attention to. I was born on a Jupiter moon parent, and I had a perfect grandma, which isn't Ceres, but it is Jupiter moon. And her house was a total sanctuary. Literally all she would do is just feed you all day long, just like the Taoist sage. They just feed your belly, not your mind. So I could just sit there all day. She'd bring me food. I'd watch Spider-Man as a kid. Nothing but happiness, nothing but perfection, just raspberry bushes in the backyard. I mean, it was just magical, you know. So anyway, Jupiter moon can be good too. But you know, I went through my head and thought about, you know, would I rather have a Jupiter moon parent or Ceres moon parent? Would I rather have a Jupiter sun parent or a Ceres sun parent? And the one I do like better for Ceres for sure is Mercury. Jupiter doesn't combine quite as well with Mercury as Ceres does. Ceres like the grandma helping the kid, you know, Mercury's more like a teenager or youth. So that one has a real niceness about it in my experience. Jupiter Mercury is also good for Mercury stuff, but it's more mixed because they're so different. You know, they rule opposite signs and they clash more. So that one I think I do prefer Ceres Mercury over Jupiter Mercury. Sun Ceres and Jupiter Ceres, I both like both of them a lot. Jupiter moon, Ceres moon, I like both of those a lot. You know, Jupiter Venus, I will say I think I like Jupiter Ceres probably more than Jupiter Venus, but Jupiter Venus is you know, it's still quite expansive and benefic, but Jupiter Venus is sometimes too much of a good thing. So I don't know if I like that one quite as much. Jupiter Neptune I don't like as much as Ceres Neptune. We already talked about Ceres Neptune. That was the first story I told you guys. So that one is really, really magical. Jupiter Neptune can be neat too. I had a client not too long ago. They went to a Jupiter Neptune pair, and I said, I think this is a place you might want to check out. And it was in Savannah, and she was so aware of all the ghosts, like her intuition was just like picking up on all this stuff. So it was almost like she was too expansive, too open, right? The ghost energy was there, and it was like too much intuition. Jupiter Neptune is often quite good though. But Ceres Neptune is just sweet. It's just really nice. You know, the one I like better probably is Pluto. We didn't talk about Ceres with Pluto. Ceres with Pluto, what do you think? It's not great, right? Pluto's the guy who steals her daughter and you know, tries to make her his queen. I mean, you know, it's an abduction story in a way. It's terrible. So Ceres Pluto as a parent, I'm thinking grief and loss. I'm thinking heavy feelings, challenges with mother, challenges with children. I don't like Pluto Ceres as a parent. People don't tell me that they like it either. Jupiter Pluto at least has a lot of potential. Like Jupiter Pluto, you can make a lot of money on that line. Jim Lewis thought Jupiter Pluto was like a really, really good money line because he had like a client or person he knew that won the lottery while living on that line. But I don't find that Jupiter Pluto just gives people a ton of money if they live on it. You have to work for it. You have to seize the power. You got to like go after it. So if you got someone who's ready to work hard and make a ton of money, Jupiter Pluto can be very powerful for that. But that was also very transformational and can be very intense too, because Jupiter can just expand on what Pluto represents, and sometimes that's just intensity, you know. I would say I like Jupiter Saturn better than Ceres Saturn. I think Ceres is too sensitive for Saturn's influence, whereas Jupiter Saturn can at least, you know, be really strong for Saturn things. And I think that's Jupiter and Saturn are both huge, right? You know, so there's more parity between those two in a way. Jupiter Mars is for me is more of a mixed bag. I do like Jupiter Mars more than Ceres Mars, because Ceres Mars is again, that's the Stab City thing. It's not that great. Jupiter Mars is pretty mixed. It's not always good. It's definitely not always good because Mars is beating up on Jupiter. Jupiter represents your peace and your abundance and all these happy things. So Mars Jupiter can be rough, but it can also be really good for Mars stuff sometimes. So I find that one's more of a mixed bag. I had a client who was living in Kyiv before Russia invaded, before anybody really thought for sure they would. And one of the ones she had there was Jupiter Mars, and I advised her to leave. And something came into me and came over me, and I was very strong about it. I really felt for some reason she needed to leave. And it was a Jupiter Mars pair, and that was one of the reasons why. She had a lot of cousins there, which Mars is kind of like siblings and cousins too, but that kind of didn't feel right at the time, and she had some other things that didn't look right. So, but Jupiter Mars is better than Jupiter Ceres Mars, I would say in general. But anyway, so there's a few parent things. So I think that's the stuff I had wanted to say today. Now I'm going to go through the chat and answer questions and chat with you guys and see what's up.
Moses, while you're doing that,
yeah,
I can put any links that you want me to into the description of the video on YouTube.
Very nice.
And the video will be posted probably this evening. So, and I can add them at any time. So just, you know, send me whatever you want me to add to the description.
Okay. Ray makes a good point here. The threshing machine certainly seems important. There we go. Part of that agricultural revolution. So Series seems Prospina. Okay. 20 specific benefit properties. Okay, so here's where we were. So I'm caught up now in the chat. Let me go back through these now. Okay, is Ceres the same as Proserpina? Someone answered no, that was Ceres' daughter. It's another name for Persephone. Some of the mythology says Pluto was shot by Cupid's arrow at the urging of Aphrodite, who's up for some fun. Huh. That's interesting. I haven't come across that one. The myth of Persephone, Amy says, may in part represent the transition from a matrifocal to a patriarchal cosmology and society via Ceres and Jupiter. That's pretty interesting. Yeah. All right. Someone says this is why the commons disappeared and there are very few common spaces for people to gather that are commercialized. Yeah, part of the creating all that abundance that the agricultural revolution allowed for is, I mean, in a way, this is the dark side of the benefic energy. We indulge too much. We consume too much, right? We're torching our planet to where we're figuring out if maybe we can go move to Mars someday now. At least some people are, because we're stupid. We're burning up our own house because we don't live in a remotely intelligent way. Like we're utterly stupid. And so in a way, while Ceres said, okay, I need to feed all the people and I need to create all this opportunity. I want my grandchildren to have all these nice things. That all that consuming also is part of why we're destroying our planet, and everything just gets weirder and weirder ecologically, and there's more and more disasters and more desertification and more people who don't have water. I mean, it's our consumptive lifestyle is super toxic and deadly and dangerous. But again, that perfect grandma, I think she still wants to feed you. She's like, okay, you want me to buy you this toy? I'll buy it for you. It's more like that. So in 1970, the horse-drawn cradle and scythe was invented, increasing the production of grains. Series grains are carbohydrates, which can be ruled by Taurus. Yep. It's part of the process of dispossessing a ton of people from their rights to the abundance of the land. Yeah. It in that sense, it was kind of dark, right? But it did allow for a ton more agriculture to be produced. That is one thing that it did. And so that was very big. Let's see, from Ray here, before Kepler, astronomers and astrologers felt that the perfect circular orbits of the planets were necessarily correct and absolute because, well, perfect circles were divine. Yet orbits turn out to be elliptical, not circular. While I do understand the logic of the thema mundi and rulerships, I don't see it as absolute or precluding other planets and bodies being involved necessarily. My 2 cents. Ray's very, very well spoken here. Certainly a gentleman and a scholar here. And yeah, I don't see why astrology shouldn't evolve. It doesn't, I mean, things evolve, guys. We don't have to follow. It is weird to me how religious people treat astrology. It's like, in Muslim society, they adhere so much to the Quran. It's hard for them to like modernize, right? Because everything's got to go back to the Quran. And I think there's a lot of astrologers who are reincarnated who just really just, I don't know, just used to do things a certain way. It's almost like a religious fundamentalism. And it's just, oh God, it's just all over the place. It's always weird for me because I'm just not that person whatsoever. I don't follow dogma. I look into like, does this work? Is it true? Is this practical? Is this helping my client? And I don't give a crap if it follows the old scheme or doesn't. Like whatever works. That's what I'm all about. Whatever works, and this adherence to doing things a certain way is just so goofy. One positive I noted was Ceres Mars occurred when the military went to Haiti after the earthquake in 2012 and were distributing food and necessary help. Very good. By the way, I went through the Ukraine-Russia war that's going on, and I looked at the transits every single month and all of the developments every single month, and I did find that when Ceres was transiting the planets of that country, they were faring a lot better in the war. She was helping them in the war. So that is something I did see very clearly. Pisces volunteers with spiritual purpose. Yeah, Pisces has that selflessness, certainly. So yeah, that's what it ought to be anyway. Very interesting. Saturn bringing the outer planets into the reality. This describes my father's Ceres Sun Cazimi in Capricorn conjoined in Jupiter. Okay, so we got Sun, Jupiter, Ceres conjunct in Capricorn. He says he got an amazingly well-paying career job and has provided for everyone in our family, but he was overworked, worn out, worried, and irritable, right? So there we go. Capricorn gets the benefit there. He does all the Capricorn stuff. He is the grown up. He provides, but his Jupiter is suffering a bit, right? His Ceres is suffering a bit. He's not getting to enjoy it as much as he could, but he did the Capricorn part right. My girlfriend has a Sun Ceres conjunction, very, very tight in Sagittarius. And I like to think that I'm a good example of it, but certainly there have been some men in her life that were bad examples of that. And so similar, that entitlement energy, can be there with Ceres, like any of the benefic, strong benefics, but especially Jupiter. And then in Sagittarius, we get more of a Jupiter quality. But that's the thing, right? With say Sun Ceres, that person might have really wonderful father-like figures in their life or male figures in their life, but they might also have guys who believe who just like think that they deserve, you know, to get whatever they get. They're entitled. They're not great because they're just like, you know, like that. Oh, okay, interesting. So Gerhard's saying that someone, a Vedic astrologer, did some research on planetary placements. I'm guessing this is in sidereal then. She found quite a few have planets in fall and detriment, creating a lot of money for them, like Scorpio moon being the most common. See, that's not surprising. Jupiter and Virgo being second best after Jupiter and Taurus. Interesting. The reason that that's not surprising about Moon and Scorpio is Scorpio has a lot to do with money. It has a lot to do with power. You know, the eighth house has a lot to do with money, has a lot to do with power. Same principle. So because Scorpio is strengthened by the moon being in Scorpio, yeah, those people can go after what they want, you know. Okay. Yeah, Jupiter and Capricorn was found to be a good placement for these people too. Yeah, it's Jupiter and Capricorn is pretty good for the money stuff, you know. So, what is this here? We got an image, and this is going to show us some of the most common placements for the charts of billionaires. This is interesting. I'm going to move this out of the way and get a little better look at this. The most common nakshatra placements in the charts of billionaires. We have Pusha. It looks like Pusha is the big one here, as well as Swati. Pusha is considered a very auspicious nakshatra. Generally, it's like the udder of the cow. The planet connected with it is Saturn, but it's considered like it sounds more like Jupiter when you read about Pusha. Punarvasu's up there, that's ruled by Jupiter. And then we've got Jyeshta's up in there, that's Mercury ruled. Swati is Rahu ruled in nakshatra. So, and now Rahu, of course, it's going to go after things. By the way, for some of you guys who don't do Vedic astrology, I just love this example. Donald Trump went through his entire Rahu Dasha, that's the North Node, and it ended exactly when he got elected. We're talking November 2015, right before he got elected. So the 18 years before he was elected, he went through Rahu Dasha. What did he do for 18 years? Consume, consume, consume. This is Rahu, right? Let's have a TV show. Let's put my name on a building. Let's have sex with a porn star. He's just got all the stuff. He just went out there and chomped on all the stuff and inflated, you know. He has the sun conjunct Rahu in Taurus in his Vedic chart in the 10th house. Very successful period for him. He was popular enough to become president, right? Then he went into Jupiter and found out he had to like follow laws and stuff like that. So he's having a much harder time with Jupiter. Anyway, okay, we've got some more images here. Just gonna put these up here from Gerhardt. Okay, so here's this you can check this out here, the video on billionaire placements. Hasta, the top Mercury nakshatra. Oh, okay. So anyway, there's some cool stuff here. Apparently it's going to be in that YouTube video. So yeah, Bernadette, yeah, one of the most important things about retrogrades, one of the most important things I've ever learned in astrology is that the retrograde will give you the results of the opposite sign. It is so simple, and it is the key that unlocked so many things in astrology for me that suddenly made sense. Been using that for a long time. It's really, really useful. For example, Mercury will go retrograde in Pisces. And I've seen this before where astrologers are like, I've read Twitter and stuff, and they'll be like, why is this not so bad? Like they're thinking it's in Pisces, where it's in its fall, and then it's retrograde. This is going to be really rough. It tends to act more exalted when it's retrograde in Pisces, and it's not as strong in Pisces because it's, you know, so it doesn't have as much impact either. So Mercury retrograde right now in Virgo is potentially very concerning because of that same principle. So someone's saying, I got a new job at the end of 2021. Someone's saying, holy smokes, I have to show you my chart. When I met my girlfriend, Ceres conjunct the moon in the first few degrees of my 7th. Perfect grandma, have a sweet girlfriend. There you go. And she's a Taurus. There we go. Yeah, Philip is the best. Philip is really fantastic. That's Philip, who shared the French things there. Looking at Ceres and all my kids' charts, and mine makes so much sense of our relationships. Thank you for drawing attention to this. You are so welcome. My first house Ceres conjoins my East Point Neptune and the fixed star Arcturus and Spica, all in the 24th degree of Libra. Okay, neat. My Ceres is in Aries. My mom is in Aries. This is fitting their relationship with her son, with her Cap son, who has Ceres in Aries. When Ceres was discovered, what was happening? I'm thinking it was the era of the French Revolution. We tend to give the U.S. and French Revolution more toward the Uranus discovery, if I'm not mistaken. Can you say a few quick returns about Ceres returns? A few words about it. Talking about Einstein having Mercury in Pisces. Yeah. Yeah, so Einstein with Mercury in Pisces. Now, that's his Vedic chart? I think he has Mercury in Pisces. I think it's in Aries in his Western chart. So in his Vedic chart, he does that thing where, you know, it's interesting. We have to break down the chart a little bit, but Pisces gains all this strength, right? So he says things like imagination is more important than knowledge. That's kind of a Mercury and Pisces kind of statement. He had quite a cosmic perspective on things for being such a scientific guy. So I think that's pretty interesting. You know, Ceres returns. I mean, you know, much like a Jupiter return, you know, it's going to be one of these moments of grace and abundance and things coming to us. Now, it depends on the Ceres placement. You might have a difficult Ceres placement, and that return might not be so expansive and wonderful. But I think in general, you're going to see that as a great boon coming to you. Perfect grandma shows up and says, "Here, child, let me have you have the thing that you want and have more of what you need and be happier. Let me take care of you and let me feed you." It's just so happy. She's just so supportive and so cool, you know. It's really a lot like that. So should we end, or should I tell you a story about reincarnation? We've been going here for 2.5 hours, but
Yeah, we're rounding 2.5 hours now.
okay.
I just wanted to clarify, you are using Solar Fire for your for all of your charts?
That's what I'm using here. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I've used forever. I'm an old dog at this point. It's hard to teach me a new trick. So
And for the params as well?
Yeah.
Cool.
We pull those up that way. The story we'll maybe save it for another day. I think I actually know where Kelly reincarnated, and I've got some funny ways of showing you that might be true.
Ooh, that's a good segue to we'll see you again.
All right, sounds good. So let's just double check the last part of the chat. Somebody's got to run. Thank you, Ray. Let's not get into very specific interpretation at the moment. Fascinated by the connection with Sicily. Yes, the Sicily is very connected with Ceres. That is a thing. And in ancient Rome, this is the last thing I'll say, there was a famine at one point, and they decided we got to worship Ceres, and so they brought in more Ceres worship, and they started really getting into Ceres. And then, you know, apparently the famine kind of problem ended there. So that's one of the reasons why she got in touch. How do we get in touch if you would like to do a session? You can easily find me online if you Google Moses Astrology. I seem to be the first one that comes up. My website is astrologyforthesoul.com. Everything's just spelled out there. And I'd be happy to work with you guys. Love to work with relocation stuff. And I love, again, very last thing, that quote from Kelly, right? If you argue for your limitations, you get to keep them. But if you argue for your possibilities, you get to create them. And he gave us Ceres. He was a wonderful, positive, incredible guy. He was so Jupiterian. He has such a Sag element to his chart. So he was like a Santa Claus. He brought us this great gift. He brought us this wisdom of Ceres. And I've taken that baton, run with it for a while. I've proven that he was right, at least in my mind. And I think he helped open up this wonderful possibility for us to use a new benefic, a great benefic, and even to use it with things like locational astrology. And that allows us to argue for our possibilities and create them. Maybe you go to a Mercury Ceres pairing and you go create some possibilities. So on that note, thank you guys for being here. And I'm really stoked that we got to do this.
Thank you so much, Moses. And definitely send me your contact information, any contact information you want me to put into the description, and so everybody can get in touch with you.
Fantastic. And this will be recorded. So if you guys like this lecture, I don't normally ask this, but this is an important one to me, partly for Kelly, who I want to honor, and partly for this great benefic energy that I think we need to know more about. I will ask humbly if you would be willing to share it with your people, social media or newsletters or whatever you might have. So if you would, please. If not, thank you for being here anyway. I love it. Thank you.
Let us know if you want to do a part 2.
All right. I'm always down to talk about astrology.
Thank you, Moses.
All right. Thanks, you guys. Have a great one.
Thank you.